Odyssey app. It's time for Warriors This Week.
Curry with the catch. Curry, step back jumper on the way. Good at the buzzer. Ball game over.
Now, here's John Dickinson.
Yeah, welcome in. Good Saturday morning to you. It's John Dickinson. It's Dan Devone here for the next 3 hours at 95.7 The Game, 9 a.m. until noon. It's Warriors This Week. We're off and running. And Devone, the Warriors off and running through 9 games now, 7 of those away from Chase Center. Things are about to change as far as the schedule goes, and that's going to begin tonight with the first of 6 for the Dubs on the home floor. But the Warriors getting it done on the road to begin this season, 5-2 away from Chase Center after just 11 wins in the regular season last year. This year ain't last year, Devone. Good to be with you, my man, and the Warriors continuing to, at least early on, prove that point.
Yeah, and I think the loss against Denver is unlike a year ago. Typically when they would come back from a road trip, you know, you're on that plane ride and you're just like, wow, how did this happen? We got smoked again. They won only 11 times, and you're trying to gather yourself before, beginning a lengthy homestand, which starts tonight against Cleveland and then Minnesota. Oh, by the way, I want to get into Minnesota. What a scary team they're turning out to be. But I digress. Yeah, it's, this year, despite the 2 losses, one of which was to Cleveland and the loss to Denver, there's still a sense of, we held the champs to basically, came down to a one-possession game. And if it wasn't for a couple of bad calls, and you can always point fingers at various things throughout the contest, it was, if you believe in these sort of things, it was sort of a feel-good loss if you're willing to swallow something like that. But a completely different culture from a year ago.
Yeah, and look, the Warriors bench in that game got them back in the game and dominated Denver's bench. I think, as we start to look outward at future matchups, and the Warriors didn't have Draymond Green in the game on Wednesday night. The Nuggets didn't have Jamal Murray, which is obviously a huge deal. And Warriors also didn't have Gary Payton II, who's as impactful as any defender that Golden State has on their roster. So, both teams can play we didn't have this guy or that guy game, but the Warriors bench got them back in the game. I really didn't think the Warriors played all that well in the game on Wednesday. And neither did Denver. I think they would tell you, Jokic always ends up getting his numbers. I thought the Warriors, it's funny, in game, and I talked about this a little bit on Warriors wrap-up, in game I thought the Warriors really made Jokic work. But you look up at the stat line at the end of the night, and it's 35-13. He didn't have quite the assist numbers that I think he and the Nuggets like. They like to have him getting everybody else involved. Only 5 assists, had some turnovers. And really, it boiled down to, when you look at the line, he took a bunch of threes and he didn't make any. Well, 1 of 8 from three-point range. He kind of still had his way on the interior, which he has the ability to do. But, I think all in all, and I was thinking about this before the show, Dan, you love where the Warriors are at, I think, at 6-3. And I was thinking, what were the pivot point games early in the year? And, losing to Denver, back end of a road trip, before you come home, and you're playing all these different games in all these different cities, I can throw that one out the window. Cleveland looks like a difficult matchup. We'll see the Warriors and Cavs again tonight just because of the Cavaliers' size. Is there an adjustment that can be made there for the Warriors from playing them, 6 nights ago in Cleveland? But I look at the home game against Sacramento. I look at the Oklahoma City win that we talked about a ton on last week's show because it was a week ago Friday. And then just the ability to not slip up after you lose in Cleveland and handle business at Detroit. There were points in that game where it looked like it was going to get a little dicey for the Warriors, but they were able to hold their mud in that game, win that game. And to me, those are the 3 wins. That Sacramento game, Klay Thompson hits the shot. The OKC game, the Warriors are able to execute down the stretch and make a couple key defensive stops. They get the bucket on the Draymond put back that wasn't on the Curry floater with the wiped away goaltending. And now you look up and if this team is going to be as good as they were or close to as good as they were on the home floor this season, they got a real opportunity to make some hay. And then you'll figure out the Denver matchup in the playoffs and all of that stuff down the line.
Yeah, this is something you got to take advantage of. Now, we don't want to just play under the assumption because they were so good a year ago at home, and typically they are good when they're playing at Chase that this is going to be a 5-1 homestand. Again, while you're home for an extended period of time, these are formidable opponents. And while the Cleveland Cavaliers have made stride again, Minnesota, my goodness, a lot of people have them as the sexy pick coming out of the West this year. And again, we can dive into them a little bit later in the show. But I would add to that, you talked about significant wins. Again, you never want to be one of those that walks away from a loss and feel too good about it. But I had the feeling, as I'm sure a lot of others, that was a scheduled loss, all right? You're playing the defending champs, and not only that, you're doing that at Denver, which is a difficult place to win a game. And it just had the sense in the first, I'd say, 5 to 6 minutes that this is a blowout. Denver was going to run away and hide. It just seemed low energy. Draymond wasn't there. Steph certainly wasn't getting on track in that first 5 minutes, that first half. And it just, you felt as though this was Denver, but it's okay. It's a 4-game road trip. This is Denver. And for them to stay close, and I think to keep the Nuggets to within 108, and I think more than anything else, it's the defense that's returned. If you were to ask me what jumps out and what's different about this team as opposed to years past, and the one thing that sometimes always gets overlooked but always was evident with the Golden State Warriors during their dynastic run was the defense. You had the Splash Brothers doing their thing, Kevin Durant when he was here. Everybody focuses on offense, but they were either 1 or 2 or in the top 5 defensively during those championship runs. And it looks as though, and it might be a little bit premature, not only do you have a bench, but you have defense. And when you have defense, you're always going to have a puncher's chance. And it keeps you close. And I think that was the case with Denver. Again, amassing only 108 points, and the Warriors were always in striking difference because I think that defensive component has returned to the team.
Yeah, there is more of a defensive identity, I think a competitiveness on that end to where you're not going to play well every night defensively, but you can at least compete on defense and prevent yourself from some of the big runs that allowed games to get away. The Warriors gave up a lot of big runs last year on the road, stretches where they just couldn't score and they're kicking the ball around. I think offense also plays into the defense with this team because they're not turning the ball over. I think for the most part, they're taking a lot better shots than they did. And how many times last year, especially at this point last year, as the Warriors were struggling mightily away, would it be 3-4 just to the worst turnovers you'd ever see in a row, and then an inability to get back in transition defense, and all of a sudden it's a 14-4 run, and a game that was tied, you're down 10, and it's almost lights out. You almost need a perfect quarter or perfect performance down the stretch to win that game. I think the offense for the Warriors, while it hasn't always been fluid, and there have been times where it's been Steph Curry is the man and everybody else is just kind of doing their part, and I think night in, night out over 82, that can be a little bit more difficult to rely on when it's one guy and you're looking for 2 or 3 different guys each night, although Klay Thompson, I think, has been pretty steady in the positive light, although his numbers have not been gaudy. But I think the offense has led to defense, to better defense, because they're not putting themselves in position where they're giving up so many easy baskets and they're just so out of position based on really shot turnovers, which I think this team had a bunch of them, and actual turnovers and live ball turnovers that lead to layups and dunks and easy buckets on the other end.
You talked about Steph Curry, and that really is, I think, something that you want to keep an eye on going forward, because this team cannot be one-dimensional. And as good as things have been thus far, relying on Steph Curry as much as they do and did last year, the feeling I got just immediately as they got to the second round and were out after 6 games with the Los Angeles Lakers was they need more. They just need more offensively. This is Steph, and they go as far as Steph will take them. Now, back in the day, Klay Thompson would offset a lot of that. You had Kevin Durant. They have become about as one-dimensional of a basketball team. And again, I think a lot of this gets back to what I was saying earlier, that when defensively you can keep things within reach, that's okay. But I don't know that this is sustainable if somebody doesn't rear their head and take away or at least offset some of that scoring. And, of course, the slow start to Andrew Wiggins has a lot to do with that. Klay Thompson, you've talked about how efficient Klay Thompson is. My goodness, I think that over the offseason, the fact that he either heard the criticism or was talked to or it just seeped in him hunting shots. Remember that this time last year, trying to get on track?
It was awful.
Oh, my goodness.
It was awful. And I think, this year so far, Dan, it's been a scenario where Clay's he's letting the game come to him more. He might take a bad shot here or there, but you can live with, and I just used the last game as an example. You can live with Klay Thompson going, 5 of 12. You can live with Klay Thompson his bad nights being 5 of 12 or 4 of 11. You can live with that as opposed to it felt like last year the 5 of 12s were turning into 6 of 18s, and it was just or 7 of 19s, and that just isn't going to cut it because a lot of those misses when those shots are not going in lead to those opportunities. Really, a lot of his misses are shot turnovers when he's in that mindset and he's not hitting. Obviously, there's nights where he is going to be hitting at a high level as one of the greatest shooters of all time. But no, I know a lot of people are thinking, and Clay's still averaging 16 and a half points per game, but I love the way Klay Thompson's played to this point this season. I think he's been steady defensively. I think he's, again, there's been games where the shot's been there, but he's keeping the ball moving and, taking the right shots. And I just think this Warriors team's playing a lot more disciplined than they were a year ago.
But I think it gets back to what it is that I was talking about, and that is his shots per game are down considerably, which is
big time.
I think the message is he understands, and I love it when he's in the mid-range, and his mid-range jump shot and that Jimmy is just so – it is such a beautiful thing to watch. If he's was to never shoot a 3 again, I know that sounds ridiculous. I would have no issue with it, but Klay Thompson –
I don't know about that. I'm not going to go that far, Dan.
When he's down to 12 or 13 shots – but I guess, JD, it gets back to, okay, you love the efficiency now with Klay being so much more judicious with his shot selection. But again, if he's low volume in shots and Andrew Wiggins is being Andrew Wiggins, well, who then is going – because no starter has 20 or more points to this point in the season is sort of eye-popping. But who is it that's going to alleviate the scoring duties from one Steph Curry going forward?
All right, he's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. We'll open up the phone lines, 888-957-9570, Comcast Business text line as well. It's Warriors This Week, as we are with you here until noon on 95.7 The Game, as we do this each and every Saturday morning, talking Dubs basketball. The 6-game homestand begins tonight, and you're right. It is a doozy at different points here. Kind of a mixed bag. Cleveland, obviously we know what they're capable of. Gets this thing tipped off tonight, 5:30 tip here on 95.7 The Game, and then Minnesota playing as well as anybody in the Western Conference. Warriors are going to play them twice, the little 2-game mini-series, Minnesota out here on the West Coast, so they will play Sunday and Tuesday, both of those games, and I think Tuesday we won't get lost in the weeds. I think Tuesday is one of those in-season tournament games. There was another in-season tournament game last night in the Warriors bracket, with Sacramento getting the jump on Oklahoma City. So OKC, Dan, I don't know if you're following. OKC's 0-2 now in the group play portion of the Warriors group. We'll keep everybody updated on that. I'm kind of kidding around right now. But yeah, 2 against Minnesota and then 2 against the Thunder for the Warriors as they'll go at it at Chase Center next Thursday and Saturday. And then the Rockets, who have been a team that's actually been one of the little surprise teams. They got off to a poor start, the Rockets did, but they've now won 5 in a row. They were 0-3 and looking awful. They got Sacramento a couple of times without De'Aaron Fox last weekend and thumped the Kings twice. And then they thumped the Lakers after that, came back and beat the Pelicans last night. So they're playing well, and that's coming up a week from Monday back into that homestand. I want to go back to what you were talking about just with and you had the note, and I looked. No other starter has had 20 or more other than Curry in the first 9 games. Dario Saric was the one player that did have 20. But the balance has been there, yeah. and that's the thing. And I think as we start to move outward and look at kind of what do you make of the 9-game start, because I think there are boxes to be checked on the positive side as this homestand begins. I think there still are some concerns. I don't want to sit here and act like the Warriors have everything dialed. They've won a couple of close games that if they hadn't won, maybe we would be having a different conversation if this team was 5-4 or 4-5. I think we absolutely would. But Andrew Wiggins hasn't played well, and the Warriors are still 6-3 and 5-2 on the road. I think that's actually a positive sign. I think Jonathan Kuminga has helped them in stretches scoring the basketball, and he's been one of those players, I think, at a little under 13, where he hasn't played as well as his scoring average would tell you. He really hadn't done a lot of other things, but he's gotten some key buckets, in particular in second halves, after some bad starts to games in the first half, to where the Warriors have needed him. So I don't think Kuminga has been anywhere near his best, but he's still done enough in portions of these games to help them win. And I feel like that's been the line up and down the board. But then when you look at the numbers and you separate yourself from it, the bench numbers have been outstanding, top to bottom. And it's been led by Chris Paul, and it hasn't been the same players every single night. One night it might be Saric, another night it might be Kuminga. Chris Paul's right in the middle of everything. GP2's doing what he has to do. And you look up, and the Warriors, I think bench connectivity, these guys, for the most part, are used to playing together. I think a lot of other teams in the league are trying to figure out their bench at the beginning of seasons. Either failed starters or rookie, younger players that they're trying to get more of a role carved out for. I think Denver's doing that right now. Denver's a team that is not as deep as they were last year, and the Warriors just obliterated them in terms of bench scoring. And so that's a little subtle portion of the game that the Warriors were losing a lot that now they're not losing, and it gives Steph extra opportunities now and the starters to win a lot of these games in the second half and down the stretch.
This might be the deepest bench, potentially, because, again, we have to remind ourselves this is just a snapshot of the season. We're only 9 games in. But potentially the deepest bench that Steph, Clay, and Steve Kerr has ever had, and that's certainly saying a lot. The question then becomes, once you get into this, is – because I hear this from time to time that, when you get to the back end, that Jonathan Kuminga and Moody need more time. I'm not sure that Kuminga's ready to jump anybody when you're talking about, because I think, JD, when I look at the bench, I see a solid 8, okay? The sixth man clearly is going to be Chris Paul. And then after that is GP2. You feel good about that. You feel pretty comfortable with those guys coming in and getting their steady minutes. And then simply because he's a veteran and he has a high basketball IQ, Dario Saric, I think, is number 8. I don't see Kuminga at this point or Moody jumping either of those guys. And correct me if I'm wrong or how you feel about that.
Well, I think they're all going to play on it, at this point. So I think it, and they've all brought different things to the table. I do think, if you really have to put a number to it, Chris Paul's the 6. I do think Peyton's the 7. I think you could make a case if Kuminga and Saric are 8, 9. But however you want to put it, and look, in a lot of these games, Moody's been better than Kuminga. And if you want to count Moody as the 10, to me, it's more about the fact that the Warriors know on a night in, night out basis who their 10 is going to be. And good, bad, or indifferent. And I know we can quibble about Andrew Wiggins hasn't been good, and they haven't had secondary scoring from any one particular player. Steph's been out of this world. Draymond's been in and out of the lineup. Like, we can quibble about the little things that each individual player has or hasn't brought to the table, really with the exception of Steph, who's been phenomenal. But the Warriors know their 5, really 6 with Chris Paul because he's been out there finishing, and then they know their next 5. So to me, just knowing who that is and having the rotation pretty consistent. I think Steve Kerr has basically used the same rotation, although the Warriors have had some different starting lineups. He's used the same rotation of 10 the whole year. And then you pepper in a Trayce Jackson-Davis if somebody's out. And so to me, that's the ideal way you want to run your rotation. If you're an NBA head coach, you want to know your 5, have really 3 more you absolutely trust, but a group of 5 that you can trust to be out there together. And then you go 11 and 12 deep when you need to. Trayce Jackson-Davis becomes somebody who played well against Denver the other night again. When he's getting opportunities to play, he's looked pretty good. But Trayce Jackson-Davis is your 11 or your 3rd big or your guy that's going to pop into the rotation immediately when any of your other bigs are out, like Draymond Green was the other night. So, to me, that's a luxury to have him as like your 11, and then Podziemski even as your 12. is, all right, you've got Gary Payton's out, so now Podziemski's going to play, and you're confident that those two rookies can play a little bit. Again, not going to be playing a ton on a night-in, night-out basis, but Trayce Jackson-Davis, 18 minutes. Podziemski had 11. And so you look at it, and I think the Warriors, they know they're top 12, which I think is excellent, and it puts them ahead of where they've been, I think, in recent years, and it puts them ahead of other teams that when you watch the league, and I was watching a lot of games last night, it was a big night, a lot of teams can't figure out what their bench wants or needs to be. So the Warriors are ahead of the game, I think, from the jump, even though they're getting varying degrees of production from individual players up and down the line.
Yeah, well, typically this time of the year, you're trying to find rotations, you're tinkering with the bench, you're trying to find out, the best assembled pieces when you put them in a game and who plays best with whomever. And so, think about this a year ago. When the Golden State Warriors had to sub out, it wasn't Chris Paul and it wasn't, the likes of Saric and company. It was Anthony Lamb and JaMychal Green and Ty Jerome. So just to sort of shine a light on how different a year makes, I do want to get back to just sort of the rotation. And the reason why I bring up Jonathan Kuminga, because again, to me, and I know that I might be back on, Dan Avone's island of one, but I still think that Jonathan Kuminga, for the Warriors to really be relevant, and one of those teams that you're saying, okay, another NBA championship is certainly within your midst this year, and you can dethrone Denver. I think that he has got to leapfrog and be potentially your number 7 or even your number 6 coming off that bench, because he's got to unlock that athleticism. It's not there yet. He's still dribbling into traffic. The rebounds are still sort of a head scratch with all that athleticism and that size. But if he becomes the sort of player that Steve Kerr says, you're now in my rotation and you're going to be 6 or 7 off the bench because you're playing that well, and I have that much confidence in you, not only in the offensive end, but on the defensive end, then I think the Warriors really become an even more relevant team when you're talking about winning a title. And just really quick on the back end, while I agree with you, when I see Trayce Jackson-Davis, like a lot of people, I just get that tease of, wow, young and athletic. And is there any way this guy can see the floor aside from that of an injury to Looney and or Draymond Green? Because I know there's got to be a sense of Warrior fans that are out there, like, really, this guy's going to go DMP until somebody goes down. Is there any way he sees more run, even with everybody at full strength?
I think it's possible. I don't think he's a guy that's not necessarily going to play every night if everybody's healthy. And we've seen it. There were a couple games where Steve Kerr didn't use him in the first half and then did use him in the second half. Yeah, it's not going to be 20 minutes a game probably, but it might be a 5-minute shift to change the complexion of the game here or there. And look, Steve Kerr, just because you don't play in the first half doesn't mean you're not going to play in the second half. And always be ready. And so I think he's done that a couple of times with the rotation. But I don't think we're going to see a scenario where he's just taking somebody's spot unless, and again, we talked about Kuminga, and I'm not. It's funny, we discussed this last week. I've been one of the guys in the Bay that's sort of gotten the knock of being down on Jonathan Kuminga, right? Because was unplayable in the playoffs and all that stuff, and I was the first one to say it, and rightfully so, and people were screaming at me like, no, they got to give this guy a million different opportunities. It's like, no, this is the playoffs. If he plays another freaking second, you guys are losing in 5 to Sacramento. And so, but I'm not down on Kuminga at all. Like, I think he hasn't played. I don't think he's played great, but I think he has, like, I'm not looking for I don't need the high end from Kuminga. And he still is their third leading scorer. So he's scored, even though it hasn't always been efficient, and even though he hasn't really brought much other things to the table that I think the Warriors want. He's felt almost like a bucket getter when he's been out there. He's really taken a lot of shots. It's like, almost like he feels like that's his, like they've green lighted him to go, go get yours, go look to score. So again, do you want that? I think they're giving him every opportunity to try and be a scorer to this point. At least it's looked that way. I'm not down on Kuminga But I just don't have the reason I'm not down on him is because of the same things that people have been critical of me before in the past. It's the fact that I'm not expecting this major jump this year. I just want him to be a capable rotation player. And again, not an indictment of what he becomes later on in his career. I always feel like I have to say that. He may go on to be an all-star type player and somebody that's a foundational piece that you can build around. But he's still, 21? And it just to think that he's going to just start cooking people and being a major part of the big core group, I think it's just a little bit premature. And along those lines, and Dory will get to you after the break. I was going to sneak you in before, but we got Dory on the phone lines. I want to make sure we stay on time and everything, and give Dory his opportunity to weigh in here at 888-957-9570. But you hear the whispers of, well, do you flip Kuminga and Wiggins? No, you don't flip Kaminga and Wiggins right now, because Kaminga is playing well in his role, and Wiggins has got to freaking figure it out, and you're winning. You're 6-3. So it's like, I don't think Kaminga has played well enough to where you're like, even as poorly as Wiggins has played, you feel like you have to make some kind of a switch, at that point. So I'm not down on Kaminga. And, to your point, I do think he's been impactful in terms of not gaudy numbers, but he's still averaging 12.4, and the Warriors have needed it. And there's been a few nights where I don't think Kuminga's played all that well. And you look up at the end of the night and he's got 12 or 14 or 19. And so I think, that's been a subtlety as to why this Warriors team has been able to have the record that they do. It's that they're winning, even though it hasn't been perfect. Probably the simplest way to put it. All right, he's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. 888-957-9570. We'll come back. We'll get to the phone lines. Just your biggest concerns to this point, but also how you feeling about the 6-3 as the Warriors homestand tips off tonight against the Cavs, and we'll have it all right here for you on 95.7 The Game.
With Black Friday savings all month long at the Home Depot, you get all the jingle bells and whistles you could wish for with LG appliances. With America's most reliable line of appliances per independent consumer study, you can take holiday doing to holiday done, and all.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
All right, John Dickinson and Dan Devone, 888-957-9570. It's Warriors This Week. Dubs are 6-3, 5-2 on the road. 6-game homestand begins tonight. What do you say we get to the phone lines, my man? Let's do it. Let's get to Dory. Dory gets us tipped off here on Warriors This Week here on a Saturday. Dory in San Francisco on with JD and Devone. Hey, Dory.
Hey, JD and Dan. Nice to be tipping it off. Before I get to a question about Jackson-Davis, I want to follow up on JK just a little bit. To me, he's been an enigma because it's so super early, but the majority of the games, he's been horrendous in the first half,
yes,
and has completely flipped it in the second half, and it's been awesome. So that points to something mental so I don't know how to view that, but certainly he's not getting discouraged and he's able to make adjustments. So I wanted to just, make that observation. But I have a question about Jackson-Davis. Tim Kaminga had a mailbag, and someone asked, how the hell did the Warriors get him at number 57? And I didn't understand Tim's answer. So I'll read it to you. It's 2 sentences. It says,
sure.
Jackson-Davis's agent, who's the brother of Mike Dunleavy, right? James Dunleavy. So Mike knew that they were going to offer him a 2-year deal. So the agent knew that. So because the Warriors would give him a multi-year deal, which is so unusual in the second round, he says the teams picking ahead of 57 weren't going to give Jackson-Davis a multi-year deal because they were told to pass. So if I'm a team in the second round and I like Jackson-Davis and I'm picking before the Warriors, what do I care that they're going to give him a 2-year deal? Don't I have every right to give him a 1-year deal and just say, you're playing for us?
You do, Dory. Absolutely. But again, that's kind of how the game is played in the NBA. And thank you for the call. That kind of stuff goes on a lot, especially during the draft, where you'll have agents say, hey, this guy didn't want to play here, or he's not going to be happy, or we have a promise from somebody else. And all of that noise is part of what teams have to sift through. But to answer the question bluntly, Dory's question, Dan, anybody could have taken him, and then you negotiate. It's not like, in the NBA, you're going to the team that picked you, and you can work out whatever contract suits you within the CBA qualifications. But any team could have done it. But yeah, that's the kind of thing where his agent, Trayce Jackson-Davis' agent, the brother of Mike Dunleavy Jr., was putting pressure on teams to not select Trayce Jackson-Davis because they were trying to get him to the Warriors, and it wound up working out.
Yeah, and just staying with Trayce Jackson-Davis for a second, I don't think it's by accident that the Golden State Warriors, after taking 2 teenagers in Moody and Kuminga, and even going back to Weissman, and jury's somewhat still out on Moody and Kuminga. We'll find out just exactly how impactful they are as basketball players going forward. And Kuminga, the Weissman project obviously didn't work out. I don't think it was accident that they took a 23-year-old rookie this year. I think that a guy that we talk about the high basketball IQ, 4 years, not only 4 years, but 4 years at Indiana under Coach Woodson, a guy that not only played at the NBA level, but coached at the NBA level. He was about as ready as far as making, quote unquote, a seamless transition that you can get from the collegiate level to that of the NBA. Now, obviously, there's always risk involved with anybody that you draft, but I think that it was by design that they either wanted to balance out from going young kids who have a huge upside to take into somebody that's a little longer in the tooth, if you will, that maybe doesn't have as high of a ceiling, but there isn't that level of, oh no, rookie mistakes, we got to deal with this again for another year, year and a half, maybe 2 years, depending on how long before the game slows down and they really get this. We always talk about matching windows with the veterans and wanting to win right now, Steph, Dre, and Clay, and making sure that you get, players that you bring in. And if they're rookies, hopefully they're not somebody that is as green like that of a Kuminga after, age 18 coming into the NBA. So I think it was by design that they got a kid. And again, I the fact that he has been so impactful, I oftentimes just wonder whether Steve Kerr's rigidity of just hanging on to sort of this old template of being old school, that you're still a rookie, that you don't get run until, Draymond Green or somebody's down with an injury. Is there part of that going on? Whereas not recognizing that today's college basketball player, especially a guy who's at 23 years of age coming into the NBA, that maybe you don't necessarily have to look at him as far as playing time through the same lens as maybe some of the younger players that he's drafted over the last couple of years.
See, I'd flip that and say he is giving him time. Okay. And he is playing, and he's playing, even if it is 5 minutes here and 10 minutes there, he is giving him time that other rookie players or younger rookie players would not be getting. And I think you only need to go back to Wiseman or Kuminga or Moody to see that that's the case. I mean, Trayce Jackson-Davis is more trusted right now.
Well, Wiseman started as a rookie, though, right?
But he started because they were not on a contending team.
That's right.
He started because Klay Thompson was out, and that team had no chance to win a championship. We saw how it was the next year when he came back, and the Warriors were. I mean, he was barely playing. He was injured actually, so he wasn't around at all. And then last year he was barely playing at the beginning of the season when they were coming off of a championship, obviously contending for a championship. But yeah, so I think when you look, so I think Trayce Jackson-Davis is getting opportunities. At some point, he forces the hand though of Steve Kerr to give him more opportunities if he continues to be impactful. I mean, I think that's absolutely true. The only question I would kind of kick back to you would be, it's the age old, if you want somebody to play more, well, who's going to play less? And is it Looney? Is it Saric? I know the Warriors have played Saric some at 4 when they've had injuries. They've played Saric and Trayce Jackson-Davis together a little bit. Is it Kuminga that winds up being a player that gets less minutes? So to me, it's that's the rub when you start saying you got to get this guy on the floor, you got to get this guy on the floor. It's in the place of who, and I would say certain lineups it might be Kuminga, others it might be Looney or Saric, but it's not cut and dry.
No, that's a good point. And I think that to answer that question, until Wiggins gets it going, I might shave some minutes off of him. And Saric, I guess it's one of those that you just have to defer to guys that are there every day and to know this game much better than me, and that is the Steve Kerrs and the guys that make these decisions. Because sometimes I'll see Saric and I'm like, I think that in that game against Denver, you could clearly see that, especially early on, that Jokic was hunting out on a switch. He's like, oh, I got switched onto Saric. Everybody get the hell out of the way. And I'm just backing him down. And there's not anything a lot of people can do. I mean, Looney can control him to a certain point. Draymond Green, as good as he is against, the Joker, he's still overwhelmed at times. But it was pretty one-sided when it was Saric on a switch with Jokic. And my point being is that I watched that game, and I'm just wondering whether Saric wasn't shooting very well from the outside. I guess to the casual observer, I would say, give me a little bit more Trayce Jackson-Davis to answer the question as opposed to Saric. But I think Steve Kerr would immediately clap back that, there's things that he does as far as the rotation. He's a cerebral player. He's a veteran. And maybe it doesn't jump out at a stat sheet and or to the casual, fan that's watching this that Saric provides to a team. But I can just tell you that watching the game the other night, and I'm not saying bench Saric and give all those minutes to Trayce Jackson-Davis, but seeing Trayce Jackson a little bit more and maybe reducing some of the minutes for Saric just sort of immediately jumped out at me.
Well, and I think you answered it in or at least the simplest way to look at it. It's Steve Kerr picking certain games where Trayce Jackson-Davis maybe is a better matchup than Saric. Now, Wednesday's an interesting one because you knew Trayce Jackson-Davis was going to play with Draymond being out, and then Saric moved into the starting lineup as well. So Saric basically started at the 4 in the game on Wednesday, which opened up the backup 5 minutes that Saric had been getting to go to Trayce Jackson-Davis. So that was how they kind of balanced it to get him on the floor a little bit more. I think what you're saying is, and I think this is the tricky part for Steve Kerr, but it is the simplest way to look at it. It's pick the nights where when you are whole, maybe Saric isn't the backup center and Trayce Jackson-Davis is over Saric. And it's not going to be every night because there's going to be some nights in matchups where Saric can go for 20 and you need that off the bench because you're lacking in some of the other secondary scoring. I'll give you one example, and I mentioned this earlier generally, but I'll be more specific. Go back to game 2. So it was 2 weeks ago tonight, or 2 weeks ago last night, rather, in Sacramento. And the Warriors did not play well. Their bench group did not play well in the first half of that game. It was Chris Paul with Peyton, Moody, Kuminga, and Saric. And the Kings, I think, went from being down 3 or 4 to being up 9 or 10. And then the starters came back in, and the Warriors were able to actually cut the lead and take the lead at halftime. They had a big third quarter. Part of that big third quarter, Steve Kerr first half, Saric was the backup 5. Saric didn't play well with that first group. Second half, third quarter, Trayce Jackson-Davis was the backup 5. And basically he skipped Saric. I think he only played him maybe 1 or 2 minutes. And then he said, you know what, this is not working tonight. I'm going to go to Trayce Jackson-Davis for the final 5 or 6 minutes of what would have been Saric's shift. And Trayce Jackson-Davis came in and banged around with Sabonis a little bit and bothered him some and really helped the Warriors, who had already taken the lead with the starters, push that lead up to close to 20 in the fourth quarter, and they were able to cruise in Sacramento and have enough of a cushion to where when De'Aaron Fox started going off in the final 3 minutes, they were still had a 5-6 point lead and could hang on and win. But I think that's the other example of, maybe it's Saric in the original plan, but if he doesn't have it on a night and there's a better matchup against a big like Sabonis, you give Trayce Jackson-Davis some opportunity there.
I think the other thing that either Trayce Jackson-Davis, Podziemski, this goes back to Moody and Kuminga, and any rookie that's going to come in to the Golden State Warriors while you still have, that Hall of Fame foundation of Draymond, Steph, and Clay, is that this is not Oklahoma, it's not Houston, it's not Utah, it's not Portland. In other words, Trayce Jackson-Davis, you're showing signs. Let's just let you play. Make your mistakes. Go ahead and, we're in a rebuild. So you're going to get an opportunity to play. You're going to get an opportunity to put up some points, and it's going to expedite your growth as far as being a player we can rely on at the NBA level. The one thing with the Golden State Warriors, and this has always been the conundrum for rookies that have potential huge upside, is that the minute you make that bonehead mistake, and Trayce Jackson-Davis had that one goaltending play, and if you play him and you make that rookie mistake, well, you're under you have a much shorter leash because it's the Golden State Warriors, and that the Warriors don't have the latitude because they're a win now team, and especially with the core in their mid-30s, that you don't have the affordability to get on the floor, make your mistakes, whether it's Trayce Jackson-Davis, whether it's Podziemski, or any other rookie that might be coming into the system. You just don't have the opportunity to grow and learn on the job. And you're going to be limited, I think, from the outset. And if you play well, incrementally, we'll give you more minutes. You'll eat what's on your plate. But the idea that let's just give him run because, he's showing some flashes and he'll make his mistakes and we'll live with it because he's still just a kid and we have to recognize that. I think there's that balance of this is the Warriors. We're looking to win a title. It's sort of title or bust, and we just don't have a lot of patience for kids making mistakes at this level. I think it's something that's sort of baked in.
I think it is baked in. I think, and look, Kaminga and Moody aren't rookies anymore, so I probably shouldn't include them in what I'm about to say, but I'm going to do it anyway. I think Steve Kerr trusts Trayce Jackson-Davis more than he trusted any of those players in their rookie or even second years in the league at times, although both, especially Kuminga, had minutes carved out for him at the beginning of last year, and then he was so poor that they ended up going in different directions in some of the bigger games. But what I'm getting at is this. I think there's more of a patience right now for, again, you're not going to play your 20 minutes like you said and make your mistakes and live and die. But I think the fact that Trayce Jackson-Davis is on the floor as much as he has been shows that Steve Kerr is trying to give opportunities, but the pieces also fit better. And this is where I was going to relate it back to Kuminga and Moody. And I think Moody's been pretty good. But Steve Kerr, I think he's gone out of his way to keep playing Kuminga in a bunch of situations where last year I don't think he would have. And the caller Dory mentioned how awful Kuminga had been really in 4 straight games in the first half, and then was pretty good in the second half and helped the Warriors. I think in some of those games last year, Kuminga wouldn't have played in the second half. He would have had his spot skipped in the rotation, and rightfully so. So the point I'm getting at, though, is you gotta give him more opportunities in the regular season to work through some things. And I think now, and again, this is year 3 versus rookies, but I think Steve Kerr's making a conscious effort to stick with the guys that they've penciled in as their top 10, and then Jackson-Davis and Podziemski as the 11 and 12s. Stick with those guys, give them opportunities even if they're not playing well, and don't make it an automatic. If you're not good in the first half, you're not going to get run in the second half. So I actually think watching the games to this point, there has been a little bit of an evolution over years past.
And it's worked. I think the bottom line is that the bench is arguably the best in the NBA right now.
The pieces also fit better together, I think, Dan, and you've got Chris Paul, who's out there as the glue holding it all together, which has just been, we haven't mentioned Chris Paul a lot in the first hour here, but and he's another player that I would put in the category of, he hasn't shot it well, but his impact on the game really in 6, 7 out of the 9 has been dramatically positive.
Yeah, and what's funny is that the last time we did a show, and I'm sure people throughout the week in 95.7 The Game talk about his remarkable assist to turnover ratio. And in that first play against Denver, sure enough, it was like his 3rd turnover all season long. I think he tried to throw a pass to Steph Curry, and it got turnover. But he's been, if not the reason, certainly at the very top as to the turnaround with that bench play and the calming effect. And again, just making sure that the floor is balanced, having a veteran on the floor that doesn't turn the ball over. It's night and day with this team. Just to stay with to stay with Paul for a second and Steph Curry, it was a little, I don't know if they've completely, when we talk about rotations and playing with one another, when those two are on the floor, especially late in the game, it still seems a little clunky. Because I know Chris Paul and Steve Kerr's either rewarding him or wants him out there, like, you may not start, but you're going to close for us. And there were times in some key possessions late against Denver where I don't know where the hell Steph Curry was. He typically would have the ball, and he's the guy that, the offense is going to go through him, but it was Chris Paul that was handling. And I don't know whether he was getting lost behind Jokic and Gordon. I didn't even remember seeing him on certain half-court possessions. And I don't know that they necessarily have worked out the Chris Paul, Steph Curry, especially late in games, the rapport between those two.
So sometimes you got to let sometimes you got to let Steph Curry cook in those instances. And I'm with you. I think Curry was, and look, teams are always going to try to take him away. The Nuggets, Michael Malone mentioned after the game on that final layup that was challenged by Jokic when Curry went for the 2 and the tie. They were hell bent on, you're not hitting your step back 3. And Michael Malone admitted that after the game in the press conference. He says the one thing we were not going to allow Steph Curry to do was get into his step back 3 to win the game right there on the spot. If he wants to drive and try to hit a layup, then we'll go to overtime, or we'll take 3 or 4 seconds left on the clock and try to go down and score ourselves and win the game. And so, some of it is, I think, the way the Nuggets defend in terms of trying to take Steph away. I think the rest of it is Curry off the ball, and I think many that cover and talk about this team, Curry off the ball in certain situations is doing the defense a favor. And I think there was, when you have someone as talented on the ball as Chris Paul is, you feel confident in his ability to get your team a good shot. And I think 90% of the time that's fine, but you have Steph freaking Curry, who's white hot to begin this season. Maybe not as much in that game in Denver, 6 of 17, but he was knocking down the 3 ball in that game. at a near 50% clip as he's been throughout the season. So sometimes I think the fail-safe for the Warriors is just put the ball in Curry's hands and let him go to work. And he's shown as time has gone on that he doesn't need a screener. He can go get it on his own, clear it out, and create his shot like the LeBrons and the Durants and those other players. Yeah,
I was listening to some post-game commentary following that loss to Denver, and there were, and these are people that I enjoy listening to, and they're pretty credible. And somebody was talking about, well, I'm surprised that Steph Curry didn't shoot a three. Typically in that situation, you're looking for the win. You're on the road, just you're down two. Just shoot the three instead of playing for the tie in overtime. That's why did the Warriors want to design a play for him to shoot the conventional two? And I don't think that was by design. Certainly with Steve Kerr, that was one of those, Steph, here's the ball. And I think you got to tip your hat to KCP, who did a good job on him defensively throughout the majority of the game, if holding Steph to 34 or 35 points is considered a good defensive job. But, yeah, you're right. Steph had the complete latitude. If you can find a crease, because he was hunting for that step back. You knew he was just trying to shake him and just give me that little crease and I'll shoot the three, but it wasn't there. And you're right, KCP overplayed him. And I don't know about you, but I could live with that shot. A left-handed floater by Steph.
Yeah.
I mean,
I was surprised he missed it. I feel like that shot goes in every time, especially late in games. I mean, how many times have we seen Steph get to the bucket for a two or even get to the free throw line late in games? I mean, teams have really tried to take the three ball away. The good teams have tried to do it, and he's carved teams up getting to the basket like that. When he drove, I thought, well, he's got it. And then the shot just missed, and Jokic came up and I think challenged it to the best of his ability. I mean, to me, that felt almost like make or miss league can be jumpers, but make or miss league can also be floating left-handed layups in the closing seconds. I had no problem. To me, and as far as the play was get the ball to Steph, and Steph's going to make the right play, and he called his own number for the two, and. Yeah, I think you can live with that every day of the week. What maybe you can't live with, and we'll get to the call here, is some of these other possessions where Curry isn't touching it because he's off the ball and they can't quite get it to him, even if you love Chris Paul and his ability to facilitate as much as the Warriors do. Mark in San Francisco before the top of the hour. Hey, Mark.
Yeah, gentlemen, I wanted 2 points I wanted you to comment on. One is, Davis gives us an inside post game we haven't had, so it's really another dimension that he adds. And also, I think the bench is going to dictate on the matchups of the other team from night to night. But the one thing Kerr has is he has a lot of depth, and he's got a lot of confidence because these players can all contribute.
Yeah, no, they can, and the Warriors, again, it's always a good sign, Dan, when you can look at a team's depth chart and it just. You're like, all right, that's your five. That's your next five. Here's a couple more that are going to maybe play some nights, maybe not others. You can fill them. You know exactly who's playing if somebody's out based on who you've got. And I think Steve Kerr is probably as confident in that, even with the balance of young and old in terms of experience that he's got on this roster.
Yeah, and the caller was talking about, Mark was talking about how Trayce Jackson is good out of the post. I don't know that that's necessarily true. He might be. I haven't necessarily seen him in the post with a drop step or a turnaround.
No, I'm with you on that. Yeah.
We'll find out. But what he is that he's athletic as a big. And the Warriors haven't had a lot of those where you can just throw that lob to a big.
Yes.
And have someone catch and finish. The one play, I think it was rookie to rookie, where Podziemski threw that baseball pass to Trayce Jackson, or he caught it and he spun and he finished in the lane. The athleticism, I think, is what's jumping off the page when you talk about Trayce Jackson.
Yeah, he's a good finisher. He likes to go up and ram it on somebody. So I think that's something that the Warriors haven't always had. All right, 888-957-9570. 1 hour down. We got 2 hours to come. We're flying through here on a Saturday morning. It's John Dickinson. It's Dan Devone. It's Warriors This Week here on 95.7 The Game.
At Bank of America, there's one question we ask our customers to learn what matters most. It's not, how much money do you have? It's not even, how much money would you like to have? No, our question isn't about money. It's about you.
it for the 2-game season series. Cavs got the better of the Dubs 6 nights ago on Sunday in Cleveland, part of the Warriors road trip where they went 2-2 as the Cavs beat the Warriors 115-104. Cleveland's size in that game, and I know we got D and DC, we'll get to the phone lines, but Cleveland's size in that game hurt the Warriors. 58-24 points in the paint, and it was really twofold. The Cavs were 29 of 41, so they were extremely efficient in the paint, over 70%. The Warriors 12 of 32. So to me, it's not always just about the amount of paint points and the like, and the Cavs did a great job on the boards as well. But it's they're able to finish in there and get what they want, and you're not able to finish in there and get what you want when you do get in there. To me, that was a disparity in a game where the Warriors did hang around, but ultimately the Cavs proved to be too tough of a matchup on that night.
Yeah, and I think teams like that are, and historically have always given the Warriors problems because the Warriors have never been big, and again, this year is no different. I mean, you're going to go with Looney.
And don't want to be.
No.
And really, to a certain extent, don't want to be.
Yeah, because the trade-off is on the offensive end, is that's where you want to make up the difference, is that the ability to get out and run and slash and take advantage of bigs who ideally or theoretically can't stay in front of you. So the Warriors will take advantage either with the three or the movement of their offense where, you have a bigger guy at 7 feet, 6'11", that just simply can't stay in front of the Klay Thompsons or the Andrew Wiggins when he has it going. So, there's a trade-off there, and the Warriors will, over the course of an entire season, the Warriors like their chances of coming out on top more often than not against teams like that.
And teams with size, while they have bothered the Warriors have been in these games. Even with Jokic doing what he did, and the Nuggets have some length as well, in addition to the best big in the league in Jokic, and the Warriors didn't come out on top in those games, but hung around in those games, despite the fact that the size was impactful for their opponent. So 888-957-9570, Minnesota tomorrow and Tuesday, Oklahoma City Thursday and a week from tonight, and then Houston to close out that trip. Couple of the 2-game short series, mini-series for the Warriors with some other teams traveling through the Bay. Let's get to D, as promised here in Washington, D.C. on 95.7 The Game. What's going on, D?
What up, D&D. I love that. Hey, Devon, this is me, man, your favorite coconut. So how y'all doing out there? Not much, bro, not much. Listen, first of all, I want you guys to address the fact that Poole is no longer there. And one of the reasons why our second unit has stability in it now is because of CP3. I mean, you guys can't deny that. As you can see, the team is looking a lot better. I mean, the chemistry is better. Even the youngsters are thriving. It's mainly because now there's some maturity on the court with them. But above all, I still think the lack of size is going to be an issue for the Warriors, unfortunately. The next couple of games, tonight's game and also the next game versus Minnesota is definitely going to expose that. Because, I mean, a tall front court who can rebound the ball and defend will definitely cause the Warriors some major, major issues. Anyway, I'm going to hang up and listen to you guys from the other side.
Yeah, I mean, styles make fights, and there are, I think, a few more teams in the NBA now that have some of that more traditional size, and the Warriors are going to see 2 of them back-to-back nights here at Chase between Cleveland and Minnesota, and then Minnesota again on Tuesday, as the Timberwolves will just hang out in the Bay and get their San Francisco trip in over 3 nights, but styles make fights, and let's see how the Warriors can overcome it, or does it ultimately do them in? They're not going to lose. I know sometimes it feels that way, and I think the fans and the callers get worked up about it. The Warriors don't lose every single game to teams with size, as much as it is problematic, because they have some things, as you alluded to, that they can do to try and combat it and use it to their advantage as well.
D also wanted to talk about Jordan Poole. D, come on. Did you not get the edict from that of our coach, Steve Kerr? We're supposed to move on. It was funny. Did you see Steph Curry caught himself in the press conference the other day?
Oh, yeah.
I'm not talking about last year. And what'll be interesting to see when Draymond comes back, whether he wants to indirectly go after Jordan Poole. Hopefully he's going to put that bag down and move on. Because you know what? I think at this point, he's making Jordan Poole look like the guy who's taking the high road because we haven't heard anything out of Jordan Poole. So it's time for Draymond to move on from Jordan Poole. But, however, D, I will feed the beast for you because I happen to, on NBA Ticket, I just saw Washington, and I had to just check in on their game against Charlotte. And I zoned in on Jordan Poole, and I kid you not, he was big. He had a huge game. This is, I think, Jordan Poole's career going forward. He had a big game offensively, and the game was played out in D.C., and people were going nuts. But I just isolated him on defense. There were 2 plays. I kid you not, he was watching Gordon Hayward, and Hayward was isolated in the corner, and Jordan Poole was watching the action, watching the point guard, and he had his back to Hayward, and he got burnt backdoor on 2 plays that were just, he literally had his hands on his side watching the action and got burnt so bad. And what stuck out to me, and we're all going to move on from Jordan Poole. Promise you this is the only mention he's going to get here this morning. But what jumped out to me is immediately following that play, if that's Golden State, Steve Kerr, maybe Draymond can't do it anymore, or Steph Curry, somebody's going to say, hey, come on, man, what was that? But because it's Washington and you develop bad habits, and this is the place where, and a lot of teams are like this in the NBA, like, that's okay. It's the NBA. It's accepted policy here. There was just like, okay, let's get the ball and go the other way. And there was no reprimand. There was no no, that's not tolerated here with this team. And I'm like, wow. Just to see him get blatantly beat backdoor and on such obvious breakdowns by Jordan Poole, and for there to be no clap back, I think just sort of sums up where he's at and where he belongs going forward.
Yeah, I mean, he's going to have every opportunity to do whatever the hell he wants, I think, with the way Washington is constructed currently, and they're going to lose a lot of games. And he's going to get paid. And look, I think Jordan Poole does want to be a winning player. I think he wants to be a winning player doing it the way he wants to do it, with a lot of offense and not a lot of defense. And look, the one thing I don't really, and I haven't watched Washington a lick. I'll be honest. I watch a ton of NBA. I love watching the top 4 or 5 teams for the most part in the East. And I'll watch the rest of the East because I do like watching the Bostons and the Milwaukees and Philly. So if those teams are playing, some of those other teams, Miami might sneak in there here and there. Then I'll get my fill of those teams at that point. But Washington has not to this point made the cut, and so just I'll relate this back to Jordan Poole. You cannot deny, as D in Washington said, the fact that Jordan Poole's departure with Chris Paul's addition has helped flip this team. Now, it doesn't mean we have to, dig in on Jordan Poole. And I'm not coming down your road here. I mean, you were watching a game and you noticed a couple of plays. I'm not going to dig in on Jordan Poole's game, with Washington and he would have done this, he wouldn't have done that. Like all the, it just like, to me, it's like he's gone. The Warriors, at least for this season, are better for it because the pieces fit together. Whether it was Draymond's fault or Jordan Poole's fault or whatever, combination of the two for everything that happened last year, it needed to be moved on from, and the Warriors moved on from it. And now, it's let's see how this season shakes out for Golden State. And I will say this, there is still, as well as everything is gone, and I'm not by any stretch saying the Warriors shouldn't have made the trade. Like I came out May, whatever it was, in the week to 10 day. When you heard the way that the Warriors core players were talking, Steph, Clay, Draymond, Steve Kerr were running it back, like that to me told you that Jordan Poole was gone immediately. Like he was gone, and they were probably going to look at Kuminga, maybe trading Kuminga, maybe not. They wound up not. Kuminga's help, that's fine. They couldn't find a deal for him. There's no reason to give up on him too quick. But Poole was going to be gone. And so it worked out to their benefit. It has, at least to this point. I still think, the Warriors won a lot of games when Curry was out last year because Poole was able to get in there and score, and they needed that in the regular season. So I'm not saying you don't make the deal. But I am interested. Well, I don't know. I don't know if Warrior fans are interested to see this. How it's going to function if Steph has to miss games, because I think we've seen how it's functioned when they've had that top 10 and the additional 2 in Jackson-Davis and Podziemski, and they can get by with a guy here and a guy out, being missing a game here or a game there. What happens? And that's one of the big concerns for me. If Steph or Clay or CP3 has to miss, what if the bench group doesn't have CP3 for a month? What if Steph has to miss 15 games in a stretch like he did right around the middle of December and the holidays last year? Like, how does this Warriors team function then, and what will their record be at the end of that?
Yeah, I think that's really the X factor in all of this. And just one more thing on Jordan Poole, simply because, I'm that guy who needs to get a life and move on, but he did.
I just don't care. I'm not busting you. It's just like, you know what? Fine. Go do your thing, JP.
So he feigned a couple of injuries. I'm just saying, as a fan, I don't miss that. Or he's like, oh, my knee. I just tore my ACL in 3 different spots. Oh, and then he gets up and walks to the free throw line. Like, I'm out on that. Do you out in Washington have fun, Jordan Poole? But now, getting back to this, sort of harkens to what I was saying earlier, back to, is this a one-dimensional team that if Steph goes down with an injury, or Steph has an off night, or if the bench isn't playing well and Chris Paul is out, who steps up? Because getting, again, just to underline the fact that no starter has 20 or more points, and we're almost double digits into the season, it's sort of alarming, especially for a team like that of the Golden State Warriors. We talked about Clay, who I think is much more judicious in his shot selection and is almost making a conscious effort to not shoot the ball as often. Well, with that, he's not that guy that's erupted for 25, 30 points, who typically at this stage of the game of a season, you would have at least one of those contests. And then I think he gets back to Andrew Wiggins, who I'd like to discuss a little bit further. But I think that is this just, Steph Curry has got to light it up for 30, 35, 40, maybe 45 in order for the Warriors, not only to win a game, but to win a title. And if that's what you're betting on, that's a really risky proposition going forward.
It is. I think we need to see more, because I think so far, and I wouldn't call the Warriors one-dimensional either. I think they have scorers that are capable. I think they have their system that they continue to run. I think they've tweaked it some with the addition of Chris Paul, and try to maximize the way that they play when he's in the game and able to facilitate, especially with that bench group. I think they have players that could do different things in the context of their framework. I just don't think it's happened yet on a consistent basis, where you've got, the 3 guys getting 20, or even 2 guys getting 20, and then everybody else falling in line. But they have been getting more than that. When you're outscoring the opposing bench at the level that the Warriors have outscored opposing benches to begin this season, and it was 42-12 in the game against Denver the other night, and the numbers are just gaudy when you look at the totality of what the Warriors have been able to do at this point. They're plus 137 off the bench. The Warriors are plus 137, and I was reading this in the game notes for tonight. It's basically 41-26 every game. The Warriors are outscoring the opposition's bench by an average of plus 15 to this point in the season. So it's you at some point you kind of feel like it's there. Klay Thompson is at some point going to have a month or two where he goes completely off. I in a good way. I love the fact that Klay's been so disciplined in his game to this point, because you still know that the hot streak is coming. The key to me for Klay was, can you have the hot streaks that you had that bloated your overall numbers into being really good by the end of the year without having the horrible games? And I think he's avoided the horrible games, which when he avoids the horrible games, the Warriors can still win those games, and that's the end of the that ultimately is the goal at the end of the day. Wiggins is the guy. I mean, it really is Wiggins. Because Wiggins does look like something's going on. He's a little bit lost. He has that, and I hate doing this because I'm a quieter type myself. when things don't go well and you're a quieter type player, everybody wants to analyze your mood and what's going on and do you have the fire and do you have the dog? And that's something that's kind of dogged Wiggins throughout the course of his career. And at times I think his play as a former number one pick had warranted that. To me, he's the one that they've got to figure out more consistency from, because everybody else, I think, has given you the bare minimum to this point except him.
I would agree with you. And I think that the 6-3 start, when you consider what Wiggins has done and or hasn't done up to this point, makes it even that much more remarkable. Maybe I haven't listened to all the shows throughout the week, but maybe I'm alone in this sort of take and or thought process. I don't have an issue with Andrew Wiggins up to this point. And what I mean by that is that should any of us be surprised? This is, to your point, who the cat is. He's a bit of an introvert. He disappears at times. I would say just about every year he's been with the Warriors, there's these moments throughout the season where there's this level of frustration of like, where are you? Where is that? Where's that guy that went baseline and dunked on Karl Anthony Towns? Where's that dog? And even this year, it's not a matter of him not shooting enough. It's just not going in for whatever reason. But he has a tendency to check out. And I think at this point, you got to just recognize that's who the cat is. Love or hate, that's just who he is. But you can also, and I'm pretty confident because I've seen enough of this, where that at some point he's going to turn it on. And let's not forget, it was just 2 short years ago when they won the NBA championship. And this is a guy that he might be 30. He still might be in his 20s.
He's still in his 20s.
They won the title 2 years ago. He was the second best player. And there are those that said that he should have been the MVP. He was that good. And I've heard people say we should consider a trade. He's got to go to the bench. What's going on? Enough of this. Now, typically, these lulls don't happen at the beginning of the season, which I think has really sort of magnified things. But we've sung this tune before. We have seen this. This is not new to anybody. He has moments where this guy just goes on Planet Wiggins, and then he comes back. But when he does come back, he's one of the streakiest players I've seen as well, where he can, he'll put it on the deck and dunk on anybody. That turnaround when it's working is as smooth as it gets. He hits threes. He's a very, he's a streaky type player. And just like anybody who's streaky in life, there are moments when you do really well. And there are other moments where you just got to bite the bullet and saying, he just climbed into that cave that he often goes into. But I have complete confidence that he's going to come out of this sooner rather than later.
Yeah, I don't know that I have the confidence level that it's going to get dramatically better. I also don't know that it necessarily has to get dramatically better. I think it is a good sign that the Warriors have been able to win at the level that they have without him playing well. I just think up and down the Warriors roster, he's the one player, and we've talked about Kuminga with the bad first halves and then pretty good second halves. So I think overall he's been, if Kuminga's been, let's say, an F in the first half and an A in the second half a lot, all right, well he's played at a C level, overall, right? And that you can live with, I think, at this point. But Steph's done his thing. Clay, we've talked about. Looney's been solid. Saric, all the bench guys. Moody has been pretty good in his time. Wiggins is the one guy where I just think he's on a different level of what's going on here to start the season, and the one that I think they're going to have to try to really figure out how to get. I don't know if it's running more plays for him at the beginning of games. I know Steve Kerr has mentioned that at different points throughout the years since Wiggins has gotten here, that he can do a better job trying to make sure that he's involved offensively. And when he gets involved offensively, he's much more engaged in the game all around, because he's somebody that can make up the difference with hustle plays and rebounding and easy twos and all those things that are so complementary to everything else that the Warriors do.
He's just checked out, and I don't know the reason why. I don't know if it's something personal, but he's just not there. It's just there's you can clearly see it.
I have a hard time saying he's checked out. I'm not. If you want to say that, I think there's a lot of people that believe that, and that's fine if that's your opinion. I'm really reluctant. A guy that is of that quiet type when things don't go well, where you're like, yeah, you know what, head in it. He doesn't care. Checked out. Not like I don't know. I just don't feel like that's. Maybe there's something going on that we don't know about. Like there was something that we ultimately found out some of the details about last year as far as his absence, and he's trying to play through some stuff, and he's got a heavy heart, or he's got some things weighing on him, and internally he's showing up every day, which I think is important, and everybody knows he's showing up every day, but nobody's talking about why, and maybe nobody feels like they need to be talking about why. But I get, and maybe I'll admit my own bias in this because I'm somebody that at times can be, quiet enough in a little bit of an introvert in situations where people, might think if I'm not like, what's going on with that guy? Is he okay? Is he into it? And it's like, hell yeah, I'm into it. But just because I'm not screaming and yelling all the time doesn't mean I'm not into it. So again, I'm not, your point is fair. I'm not trying to crush you on that. I just have a hard time going there automatically, although nobody's had a hard time going there with Wiggins throughout his whole career. Yeah. So it's it's not like it's nothing either.
Fair enough. And I think that he does, whether maybe disengaged is not an appropriate description as well, but it
looks that way. Yeah. Like I'll say this, it looks that way to the eye test, even if maybe that isn't what it really is.
It's either that and I'm not making excuses here, but let's not forget, do you remember that at the end of last year where you hurt his ribs at the end of, I think it was Game 6 against the Lakers. He hurt his ribs in Game 5, and he turned out breaking some ribs. And that Game 6, he was just like, you could see he was wincing. And after the game, somebody asked him, hey, how long are you going to be out? Like, if this is the regular season, he's like, this is 6 to 8 weeks. He may still be winded. He may still be getting his NBA legs. I don't know how much of an off season he had as far as his preparation. We know he's one of the most conditioned athletes. He just may not physically be there. Again, not to find excuses for the guy, but the reason why I'm not overly concerned, whether it's disinterest, whether it's the fact that he's checked out, maybe that's not the right description, however it is that you want to label it, I do think that this guy, and you're right, he's the one guy on this team. Jonathan Kuminga is the other, although Jonathan Kuminga is too raw at this point to count on at this level, but he's the one guy that if things aren't going well, and forget about Steph being injured, just say Steph is not having a good night shooting the basketball. He was the one guy who could unlock Steph. In other words, I'll get it going. I'll carry us for 4 to 8 minutes. I'll get because he doesn't need, Klay Thompson needs to come off a pin down. He's got to come off a screen. He's not typically the guy where you're like, just clear out a side. Here comes Steph. He's going to cross you over, get to the rim, or pull up and hit his jump shot. That's typically not his game. But Andrew Wiggins is that guy. You're right. Andrew Wiggins is so vital to this team that if Steph doesn't have it going on one of those odd nights or throughout the course of a game, it's Andrew Wiggins who can get his own. Andrew Wiggins is the one guy that you can get up on his face, but he can still create a basket. This is getting back to when the Warriors were at their very best and winning back-to-back titles. You had a younger, Steph, and of course you had Klay, but when the three ball would dry up, well, Kevin Durant, you go get yours, because Kevin Durant doesn't live on the three, and Kevin Durant can get a myriad of shots and points. And I'm not saying Wiggins is Kevin Durant, but he's that other dimension when things dry up offensively with the Golden State Warriors and Steph Curry specifically. I think Andrew Wiggins is the one dude on that team who can make something out of nothing.
888-957-9570. He's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. We're halfway through, flying along here on a Saturday morning. It's Warriors this week. Here until noon, Dubs and Cavs tonight. We're going to have it all for you right here on 95.7 The Game.
Black Friday is coming, and that's the smart time to shop for a top-rated TV from Samsung, LG, or Sony. But why wait? You can get those Black Friday TV deals right now.
Now back to Warriors This Week on 95.7 The Game.
All right, halfway through here on a Saturday morning, John Dickinson and Dan Devone, Warriors This Week until noon, each and every Saturday morning here on 95.7 The Game, 9 a.m. until noon, talking some Dubs, talking some NBA, talking a little Andrew Wiggins with the Warriors sitting at 6-3. 6-game homestand begins tonight. It's Cleveland. It's Minnesota twice. Oklahoma City twice. Oklahoma City on a Western trip as they got beat last night in Sacramento. Kings still playing without De'Aaron Fox, but they've won a couple in a row after dropping the first couple of games, first 3 games that they played without Fox. But now they are back to 500 and just kind of looking around a little bit in the Western Conference right now. Warriors right there near the top. I think that the one thing I mentioned last week, and just a quick little bit of news also, nothing major, but the Warriors have just, I know anytime you see Trace Jackson-Davis and Brandon Pajemski go down to Santa Cruz as they were yesterday, they were sent down. I think Warrior fans kind of groan. They've been recalled for tonight from Santa Cruz as Santa Cruz played last night and won their season opener against the Stockton Kings. And so Podziemski scored 24 points last night. Trayce Jackson-Davis had a double-double and scored 28. So he had 28 and 12 last night. So both of those guys playing well and helping the G League squad get a victory. And that's they're going to be on the shuttle. Like, those guys are going to go down and play and come right back up. And so when they got sent down, they were sent down to be able to play for Santa Cruz and get some minutes and all of that, and then can be active and maybe lesser contributors on what will be a back-to-back for them tonight as the Warriors take on the Cavaliers, Dan.
I thought when you mentioned Santa Cruz, you were going to give a Guy Santos shout-out, who didn't Guy just take the last spot on the Warriors roster?
He did. Some interesting that's an interesting move. There was no vet that they brought in to the point where people were saying, because the deadline, you had to add a 14th man by Tuesday, and the deadline was coming up, and I think this is an opportunity for the Warriors to kind of to stash somebody, sign a younger player that they really like, knowing full well that he's probably not going to play a whole heck of a lot, or if at all, but you keep him around the big club, and he's shooting if needed. But you also, I think, with the way you structure things, it becomes kind of a cost-effective move to where, if there wasn't a veteran that blew you away to where you were signing a veteran minimum, you can kind of sign him as a younger player to a deal and somebody that you want to have around. So it made a lot of sense. I know it seemed unconventional. I think a lot of people thought, wow, he's coming in, he's ready to contribute. To me, this is more of a future type move for the Warriors, and it's also a move of saying they don't think they needed a vet in that 14th spot, and really none of the vets that they had brought in at any point, or any of the vets that they had talked about bringing in that never quite made it to training camp were of need, given the way that this season had started. And I know Warrior fans screaming about needing a big. I think Trayce Jackson-Davis has assuaged some of those concerns, even if right now he's the third big on the depth chart for the Warriors. And so, Kuminga and Moody have held up to where maybe they feel like there's lesser a need for another wing player to be able to fit into the mix. Wiggins has been present and accounted for, so not a lot to add other than I understand why you can use that roster spot with your 3 two-way players as well in Quinones and Robinson and Garuba, who I think are probably all, for the most part, going to wind up being ahead of Santos on the depth chart, barring some injuries.
I think what's interesting going forward, again, getting back to Steve Kerr and the way he handles rookies, and to your point that maybe he's being a little bit more, giving a little bit more of a rope to that of Trayce Jackson-Davis. But it'll be interesting to see if the text line saying no Dwight Howard. Thank God. Don't get me going on that meatball. But anyways, when you talk about Trayce Jackson-Davis, well, no, he was mentioned coming to the Warriors. Please do not even entertain that. But Trayce Jackson-Davis and Steve Kerr, I'm just curious where Steve Kerr's mindset is at. Is he just bringing him along and incrementally will get more minutes, or he'll prove that he can provide a level of confidence to the coaching staff and Steve Kerr more specifically, so that maybe he steals minutes from Saric. Maybe he leapfrogs somebody in the rotation, whether that's Kuminga, whether that's Moody. Or does he stay in sort of this, I'll bring you along. If there's a matchup that I think is favorable, you're going to get some time, which is probably the most pragmatic way to handle things. I'm just curious, does Steve Kerr, is there a scenario, again, where this kid can do enough where he becomes, as we get to the latter part of the season, he becomes, say, 7 or 8 in the rotation?
I don't know about 7 or 8, but I do think he can become somebody that plays every night or most nights, which I think would be a step from where he is right now. Like, I don't, again, to me, when you have 10, it doesn't really matter who 7, 8, 9 is. Like, you need to have guys that do that. But like Trayce Jackson-Davis, I don't think is supplanting Gary Payton or Chris Paul as 6'7", and but can he be somebody that is the next big up, maybe over Saric on some nights, or somebody that's going to get 5-6 minutes a half carved out for him on a lot of nights? Yeah, I think so. I mean, I don't think by any stretch that Trayce Jackson-Davis is locked in to being the 11th man all year or being the third big. I mean, and look, he's not the 11th man every night, but basically right now he's 11 in the Warrior pecking order if you're giving, if you have to give everybody a number, just based on the fact that, the starters are 1 through 5 with, and in any order, CP3, Gary Payton, Kuminga, Saric, and Moody are 6 to 10, regardless of what number you give them between 6 and 10. They're all 6 to 10, which means Jackson-Davis is 11. But who cares if he's 11? I think at this point. But that's not to say that he can't, even if that is his quote unquote number, can get an opportunity to play more. And look, going down and dominating in the G League is, that's. I don't know how much that helps him, but it's impressive to look at. And I'm looking at the stat sheet last time, 11 of 13, 28 points, 13 boards, had a block, plus 15, played 31 minutes. So, I mean, to me, if that's not checking all the boxes as far as going down, I don't know what is.
Yeah, and again, to get back to what I was saying earlier in the show, that I don't think it's by accident that Steve Kerr, after drafting a couple of teenagers in Moody and Kuminga, and even Weissman going back in the day, a couple of years ago, I don't think it's by accident that they went and got a kid who had been at a university for 4 years and was 23 years of age. And you're further along in life. And while it may not sound like, a big leap from 19 to 22 to 23, it can be night and day, especially when you're talking about basketball IQ and, more importantly, just a well-adjusted human being and a grown man who I think sees life in more of a mature lens than maybe the average rookie. There's a huge upside with this guy. I think that what he provides and why it's a perfect blend right now with the Golden State Warriors is because the Warriors right now, as they get older, they're no longer a team that is relying on the athleticism. And that may sound counterintuitive when you see what it is that Steph is doing. But what I mean by that is that they know each other. Like, they know where to be. They know balance. They know how to move without the basketball. There's that sixth sense between those three, and Wiggins and Draymond knows exactly the dribble handoffs, and Steph Curry. They're all connected, and they do it in more of a thinking man's game as far as being effective in their system offensively. But as they don't have to be as reliant on their physical tools as they get a little bit older and still be an effective basketball team, the balance with when a Trayce Jackson-Davis comes on the floor and a Jonathan Kuminga and a Moody, and you immediately can recognize the young legs and the athleticism, guys that can just have the high motor and go up and down and don't have to worry about load management. It's a unique blend that I think that Steve Kerr has right now, where obviously he has his foundational pieces, but also mixing in just this young, youthful team of a bench of athletic guys that are just filled with energy from head to toe.
It's a nice problem to have. It's a really strong balance. And I think, again, just going back to Trayce Jackson-Davis, I think the fact that he's played as much as he has played is an indicator that the Warriors trust him and that the Warriors do think if push comes to shove, he can play more. Like, he's got to make his free throws consistently. He's done that after I think he had a 1 of 5, 1 or 6 game. He's been better. He's got to be able to not foul a lot in the NBA game if he's going to play significant minutes. But again, the beauty of this thing is the Warriors really don't need him to play significant minutes this season. I think that's the to his benefit and to the team's benefit is, everybody's looking for that big. Who's that big? That, vertical spacing, shot blocking, ability to score around the basket off of plays that are made in the context of the Warriors offense, run around in transition. He has that ability. He has the ability to get out and move his feet on the perimeter defensively as he continues to grow as a player. So to me, he's a hell of an 11th man to have right now, and I don't think he's going to be an 11th man for long, honestly, in his NBA career, even if that isn't something that comes to fruition this season. The Warriors don't need it to.
I think what I'm curious to see, and I don't know I'm assuming he can't do it, but I just haven't seen it, is whether he can shoot. Because usually everybody, and I don't care who you are these days, part of the resume, a prerequisite is you have to at some point address the line being the three-point stripe, as to whether he can step out there and provide sort of the balance that you were talking about, that you're not compromising. If you want to take somebody, you want to get Jokic or a big out of the paint, well, let's go, let's stick Trace Jackson-Davis in the corner. Can he hit a short corner three? I don't know the book on his game, JD, as to whether he can do any of that. I'm sort of unsure.
No, and they don't. And look, at this point, no, and they don't need him to.
Yeah.
Again, and I think you're getting down the line maybe a little bit farther than I want to go or than would need to be gone at this point. Again, I just think it's a nice balance that the Warriors have as far as young and old and skill sets that complement each other. And, everybody's kind of looking at this as, look, Warrior fans love the shiny, young player. They do. They love it, and they love the shiny young athletic big, I think, more than anything on top of all of that. So, when Trace Jackson-Davis, I do think Warrior fans, generally speaking, do tend to overrate and value their some of the young players, just because they're so eager to want to see if the next core group of players can be remotely as successful as the Steph, Clay, Draymond core has been, and also help that core in a complementary role get back to having an ability to contend for what would be a fifth championship. So I think it all comes from a good place. The fact that a good chunk of the Warrior fan base is so high on Kuminga, is even on nights where he doesn't play well, so high on Moody when he's been somebody that I think has been solid. I mean, Moody I think has seen his beginning to this season be an extension of the playoffs and last year and his impact and why they're so excited for Trace Jackson-Davis. The only thing I would say, and not to be a downer at all, is just take a deep breath and enjoy and just enjoy the ride, because all of these guys are going to get opportunities to play. It doesn't have to be 25 minutes every game. Like, he played 18 minutes the other night. Like, 18 minutes against the Nuggets that's for a young player, that's playing a lot for a rookie, especially a rookie, as you've mentioned a few times, playing for Steve Kerr on a team that believes it can win a championship.
Just to continue with that thought of just slow down, don't overreact, and just sort of enjoy the ride. Steph Curry, I know all roads go back to this guy, but what he's doing is just, I know that in my lifetime, I'm most likely never going to see a guy like that. And unfortunately for Warrior fans, I know the thought process is, well, as these guys get older, well, let's just, let's water and season the Kumingas and the Moodies and Trace Jackson-Davis. I hate to be the bearer of bad news. You ain't going to see another core like what it is you're enjoying over the last decade. You'll be hard-pressed to find another Klay Thompson in a draft and another Steph Curry and a Draymond Green. I mean, God bless if you can, but what it is that you're experiencing in this ride you're going through, and especially when it comes to Steph Curry, because it's not going to last that long. And Steph Curry, he was an MVP, I want to say, 15 and 16, wasn't it, when he went back-to-back?
14, 15, and 15, 16, yeah.
JD, exactly. I would argue, and I know it's still early on in the season, he might be even better now. I don't know whether, at the end of the year, whether he's going to be in that MVP conversation as he is right now. That's just remarkable when you think about it. He was in his 20s back in the day when he was an MVP, and now he's having an MVP-type season in his mid-30s. You're not going to see another Steph Curry, and you're never going to see another core like this. And as good as maybe these pieces might be with Trace Jackson-Davis, they are, at their very best, going to be they're going to be complementary pieces. They're going to be, pieces that sort of, are complements to what it is that the core is trying to do as far as winning a title. But just the old saying of just stop and smell the roses and relax, put your feet up and go, my God, I'll tell the grandkids about Steph Curry one day.
Steph's on his own level. He's diversified his game. I mean, we talked about the ability to get to the basket and finish now, and really get his own in big moments in games like that. That to me, and we can debate, and we did earlier, whether the Warriors did enough against Denver to get him the ball in those positions. They did on the last attempt to tie the game or win it with a three, where he missed the floating left-handed layup. But did they do enough to get him the rock in other situations earlier than that? But to me, that's the jump. It's the strength. It's the conditioning. Like, he's put on the weight, which allows him to take the wear and tear of somebody that's going to have to play a little more one-on-one. That was always, and maybe not even rightfully so, but that was always one of the questions was, can Steph play one-on-one, like LeBron or Durant or Harden or, any of these other, Kobe, when he was, still in the league. And so it just, like, to me, the answer is yes. The answer is yes, he can. And do it in a real diverse way with the three-point shot, which a lot of them are in the context of the offense, but also creating his own. Like, again, the end of the Denver game to me is so indicative of his ability when he's got a really good defender on him that's taken away the three, to put it on the deck, to get by, to be able to get as good a look as he did on that layup. And that's a shot that we've seen him late in a lot of games when teams really run him off the three-point line. He goes and hits that layup over and over and over. He hit 3 or 4 of them down the stretch of the game against the Kings that the Warriors stole on the Klay Thompson jumper. I mean, they were defending him and taking it away, and he said, okay, I'm going to go take my 2 now. And he can do that at will now. He's trying to set up the step-back 3. So that's something that teams are trying to take away. He's still able to get it a lot of the time. So to me, it's the strength and the ability to play one-on-one and get to the basket and still have enough left in the tank to be knocking down shots at a high level from the perimeter.
Yeah, when you think about his game back in the day, even when he won an MVP, I mean, he changed the game with him and his ability to address the three-point line and shoot it like nobody's ever done it in the history of the NBA, of the association. And then he just got in the weight room and learned to play through contact. And while he would occasionally drive and finish, he's always been able to finish. Now it's become such an integral part of his game that, as you mentioned, like the other night, KCP did a good job. And if you're going to take away the 3 and overplay him, well, then he has no problem of getting to the rim. And again, he can play through contact as well as anybody. I think when we talk about the bench this year and as proficient as they have been, and as it relates to Steph Curry, and I mean, this is true for Draymond Green and Klay Thompson as well, but for the sake of this conversation, Steph Curry, you worry about a guy who's now in his mid-30s towards the end of the season and especially the playoffs. Now, thankfully, in sort of a weird way and inadvertently, the injuries have sort of been a blessing over the last couple of years for Steph Curry. He goes down and he doesn't play for a month. Well, that's him not getting any wear and tear on the court, and he has fresh legs for the postseason. Now, you don't want that to happen by design, but I think with what's happening with the bench is that you're getting, it's sort of an indirect load management. In other words, he's playing like 28 to 31 minutes, and you don't need Steph on the floor as much because the bench, unlike years previously, when Steph came off the floor, you just held your breath and you were like, oh my God, you're down 5. Just don't be down 25 when he comes back into the game. And it's no longer that sort of thought process. And so as the bench has been improved, not only is it, beneficial for everybody, but it also gives him, I think it allows Steve Kerr to let the bench play more. And in doing so, go ahead, JD, but I think in doing so, it decreases the minutes of that of Steph Curry.
It does, and I think the other thing that it does, though, for the long haul is allow him to be able to be fresh and to be able to, on those nights where maybe it isn't clicking for the bench, the rare night to this point, if you want to go back to him with 10 minutes to go in a regular season game, you can do that knowing that there's been enough other nights where you haven't had to do that and you've still been able to win games. So I think there's a cumulative positive effect in fewer minutes here and there, keeping him closer to 32 as opposed to 36. I think that's the kind of thing that once you get to March and April allows him to play at an even higher level. I also think it's the kind of thing that once you get to the playoffs, those minutes that you didn't have to spend in the regular season, you can just add them to that playoff toll, and that makes the Warriors all the more difficult to beat.
I think Steph also, in just broaching that subject, he said not only, physically he enjoys the rest when the bench is playing so well, but I found this really interesting. He said this a couple of weeks back. He said mentally, he's like, he didn't realize that when he wasn't in the game and it was, Jordan Poole and company and they're crapping away another big lead, he said he was just so stressed, mentally what he had to exert as far as like, what's going on the floor. Now he comes to the bench and he gets whatever his treatment and he sits there and he has a sense of confidence like everybody else that you're handing the keys now to another adult and Chris Paul. And with the emergence of Jonathan Kuminga and Moody and all the before mentioned, the GP2 and Saric and company, just from a mental standpoint, it's been a huge sort of, an opportunity to decompress for Steph Curry when he comes off the floor.
It helps the vibe, honestly. I mean, it just helps the soul, I think, of the team to have others be able to contribute at that level, Dan. I think it when the Warriors are humming and have been and have won titles, it's everybody's doing their thing, but everybody feels like they're a part of it. And I think the Warriors are able right now to try and they're getting back to that where it feels like everybody is a part of it up and down the roster, and they're winning enough, which just breeds more good vibes. And so I think it all works hand in hand. It helps your youth and veteran balance in terms of everybody thinking that to me it's all in line with the pieces fit with this team, and just not knowing that while they still are extremely dependent on Curry, they don't necessarily have to be as dependent on Curry for as long in a lot of these games.
Yeah, and we could talk a little bit more about this. It's just they're not as dependent on Steph Curry because you have Chris Paul. But again, getting back to Chris Paul, I think one of the things that they need to iron out is just when those two are on the floor, it still looks a little bit awkward. And it's not a knock on Chris Paul. It's just I don't think that either the ball's in the hands of Steph Curry or it's not, especially late in games. And I just, Chris Paul's role, as everybody was so concerned of like, he's never played in a slow-down offense. He's pick and roll. This is not going to work. Chris Paul has shown you that he's a smart basketball player, and he knows how to play the game regardless of the system. Like, there's no issue with that. But I do think it's still a little undefined when those two are on the floor at the same time.
It is. I think it's a balance. It's a balance of the Warriors' traditional offense. I think it's a balance of the things that Chris Paul does to be his most effective. And then it's also picking the right moments to say it's Steph Curry versus everybody. And, it's the old joke. We have two plays. Steph, go get the ball and get the ball to Steph, right? Those are the two. And I think there are in some of those stretches in some of these close games in the fourth quarter, maybe a few more times where the Warriors have to run the get the ball to Steph or Steph go get the ball kind of an offense. All right, he's Dan Devone. I'm John Dickinson. 2 hours down. We got 1 hour to come. 888-957-9570. It's Warriors this week right here on 95.7 The Game.
There's nothing like tailgating, touchdowns, and Twisted Tea Hard Iced Tea. Twisted Tea goes down smooth and tastes like real iced tea because it's made with real brewed tea. Cool, refreshing, and a 5% kick of alcohol. Twisted Tea Hard Iced Tea. Look for the bright yellow cans wherever you buy beer.
throughout the course of the morning here on 95.7 The Game. And just kind of talking some dubs. How do you feel about this Warriors team being 6-3? It's 5-2 on the road, and the home games are coming for the Warriors. I was just looking at it, and we've laid out the 6 games at home here, Dan, coming up with Cleveland tonight. Should be a fun matchup. We've seen the Cavaliers' size last Sunday and what it can do to the Warriors. The Timberwolves are playing excellent basketball. They're going to be at Chase Center for 2 games. They're 6-2 to begin the year, although they've been the opposite of the Warriors in terms of the home-road splits. Minnesota has played 5 of their first 8 games at home, and they're 5-0 in those games, so 1-2 on the road, so a little bit of a test for them. But 6-2, and among the top 4 here to begin the year, with Denver 8-1, Dallas 7-2, Minnesota 6-2, Warriors 6-3, the top 4 currently in the Western Conference. Then the Dubs play Oklahoma City. Thunder got beat in Sacramento last night to dip to 5-4. They're a young team that the Warriors were able to beat last Friday night, and you can see how loaded they are with young talent. And then it's the Rockets, who were a surprise 5-3 after starting the season 0-3 under Ime Udoka. They've won 5 straight to get to 5-3. But I was looking at it even beyond that, and we can get into the homestand, and I know you wanted to talk about Minnesota a little bit and the Cleveland matchup, but I was looking at even beyond the 6 games at home. Warriors then go to Phoenix. They're back home for San Antonio. They go to Sacramento again. Then they have a home-and-home with the Clippers before the NBA in-season tournament week of December 4th through December 9th, and games that are yet to be determined. But beyond that, the Warriors then, their road games, Phoenix and the Clippers again. So you've got 2 Phoenix, 2 Clippers, another Sacramento, a Portland, and then the Warriors have home games all the way up until Christmas at that point where they play. The point I'm getting at is, and then another long homestand after the Christmas holiday, the Warriors may not have to leave or go farther east than Denver until January 12th when they play the Bulls in Chicago. They could have 2 months where their longest trips, and again, the in-season tournament could dictate they have to go somewhere for one game, whether it's San Antonio or one of those teams if they end up making it. But they could not end up going beyond Denver as far as east until for 2 months, basically, on the calendar from where we are right now.
You could argue that they just completed their most difficult stretch of the season as far as road games are concerned. And you're only 9 games in, and you're 6-3. So this thing does shake out. And I'm not a big schedule kind of guy, but if you want to look down the road, this certainly shakes out in favor of the Golden State Warriors as far as a home contest and having to travel and pack your bags. Some of the teams that you just mentioned that I wanted to get into, you mentioned the Clippers. I don't think we could do a show. Yeah. We haven't been able to get into the Clippers and James Harden. And why not? Why waste any more time? I'd be curious to get your thoughts on the James Harden trade. I'll tell you that I have, there's a reason why the Clippers are stupid and they continue to do stupid things. And you wonder if it's almost as though they're buying into a franchise that has been, that has done it wrong for decades. Why you could convince yourselves, because you're only bidding against yourselves.
They're a wannabe franchise. Like, I'm going to give you the short answer. The Clippers are a wannabe franchise. They want to be this star-laden, always in the mix, making runs type of a team, and basically they have 3 low-level stars that don't want to play half the time, in Kawhi and Paul George, 1 and 2. And then Harden, Harden wants to play once he figures out where he, wants to be traded from next, because that situation isn't exactly working out for him. So to me, I look at the Clippers, and my short answer on it, Dan, is I think they're wannabes. I think they're a wannabe, high-level, high-end, Lakers, Celtics, Warriors, Heat, whatever. They're a bunch of wannabes, and they're able to get the star players to come because it's still L.A., but they've now got 3 low-level dudes, and they're just going to perpetually underachieve to a point where I think the whole thing's eventually going to have to get blown up.
They just continually show that they have no idea how to assemble a team. I mean, I would just love to have been a fly on the wall when the powers that be of that of the Los Angeles Clippers. And I defer to them. They know more basketball than me. But seriously, this is what you decide that's the missing piece. James Harden is the guy that's going to get us over the top. That's the guy that we need to win that title. It's James Harden. And again, at that juncture, everybody was out. Like, no, I'll pass. They were bidding against themselves. This idea, we got James Harden, and nobody else said, well, you're the only ones that wanted the guy at that juncture. And I'm just curious.
He wanted them. And he wanted them, which to me, it's a match. To me, it's a match made in heaven as far as all the issues that Harden's had and wanting out of different places. And you've got Kawhi, who basically came to the Clippers because it was, he didn't want to go to the Lakers, and it's close enough to San Diego. And basically they're like, we're going to pay you everything that you want, and we're going to let you do whatever the hell you want. You can play when you want to play. You can not play when you don't want to play. You can come to practice when you want to come to practice. If, you know what, that 2-hour drive up from San Diego is a little too much for you to come to practice, you know what, skip practice. You know what, that back-to-back tomorrow, don't make the flight to Sacramento and play. We're playing the kid. You can just be there the next night when we're playing Oklahoma City in Crypto.com, formerly Staples Center. Like, it just, like, to me, and Paul George, unfortunately for him, I actually don't think Paul George is I don't think Paul George is low level, but for as talented a player as he is, there's just always been a too cool for school element. Like, he's not a one anymore in terms of pecking order. Hasn't been for some time. But I just, he kind of wants to get his numbers and be among the teams that are talked about or be among the players that are talked about as the elite players that are contenders, but not have really any of the actual pressure that comes along with it, because you're still playing for the Clippers and nobody gives a rip if you win the damn thing because you're the Clippers. So, that's kind of my 2 cents on the other two. And then James Harden, to me, a guy that's shut it down on 3-4 teams now. He is a perfect fit, Dan, for the low level wannabe LA Clippers. And you look at they want, how bad do they want to be the Lakers? How bad do they want to be the Lakers, Dan? That they're building their freaking arena right next to the Forum in Inglewood and SoFi Stadium right now, which, by the way, looks like it might be spectacular. But they're just a bunch of wannabes, man. They're a bunch of posers. Yeah, it makes no sense, and maybe it makes sense to who's the GM now? Redden. This I don't even know who's running things over there, but maybe it makes sense in that our long-term goal is that we got to put butts in the seats for this new stadium. I remember when the Angels and Artie Moreno signed Albert Pujols to this crazy 10-year deal. And the last 8 years of that contract made no sense, and he was making crazy, crazy coin. And it was because, once you pull back the layers, they had this new television deal, and so financially it made sense. Maybe there's something there, because on the surface, when you look at this from an X's and O and basketball standpoint, I don't know how you justify it. And just to bring things back to the Golden State Warriors, when you look at a team like that and you look at the individual talent, and maybe there's some that on paper they're like, wow, Westbrook has been so good with the Clippers, and he has, much better than that of the Lakers. Paul George and Kawhi Leonard were thought to be the two best two-way players, right, that were going to be on the same team. The three of them, and now you add James Harden. Say what you will about James Harden, but he led the league in assists, and he's shown that, he can facilitate, and maybe this will work. The thing is that collectively there's no way in hell that's going to work. Like, individually, there's some talent there, but there is, and to bring it back to the Warriors in Denver as well, and I think Rick Bucher, I may have pilfered this from him, he was talking about that, Denver, now that they've won a title, they can look at each other when things aren't going well through the course of the season, knowing we've done this as a group. We know how to do this. There's a sense of confidence. And the same has held true for the Warriors for years, that, their core knows how to get it done. The Los Angeles Clippers don't have that. They're nowhere near that. They've got, 4 guys who have never played together and have no interest in terms of finding that missing little ingredient of sacrifice of what it takes to get over the hump. So it
it doesn't make sense, but then again, nothing ever does out there in Clipperland.
No, to me, it's low level. You can make the case that it doesn't make sense. I think in a lot of ways it actually makes perfect sense. and you look up at where they are, and guys are in and out of the lineup, and they're 3-5, and of course their point differential is plus 2.8, right? So their point differential. I'm sure they're going to play this game all year. Why are the Clippers 20-20? Why are the Clippers 28-30? Why are they they're going to get it going. They're going to get it going. Nobody wants to face the Clippers in the playoffs. James Harden's going to come around. Well, even James Harden this morning, I guess, or last night, or they got beat again last night. They've lost, I think, 4 in a row. Now 3-5, and Harden's like, it's going to take some time. It's going to take some time. Like the Clippers are always, it's going to take some time. We'll figure it out. And then you're going to look up in April, they're going to be 44-38, and they're going to be in the play-in tournament, and everybody's going to say, well, nobody wants to play the Clippers. Oh my God, nobody in the top 2, 3 wants to play the Clippers. Top 2, and then they're going to get in, and whoever they play is going to knock them out, and it's going to be another underachievement for a group of wannabes, man. Group of wannabe superstars and a wannabe franchise.
Another team I want to talk about that's on the schedule and also out of the West, unlike that of the Clippers, are the Minnesota Timberwolves. Because they really seem to be the sexy pick by a lot of people that's going to be this year's Sacramento, or a team that potentially could dethrone Denver this year. I don't know that I can go this far simply because there's a lack of experience there, but they are pretty scary. And I've always liked Ant-Man and Anthony Edwards. That's crazy athleticism. He can get a little erratic still at times, but that dude is just, and in his, unlike that of Jonathan Kuminga, which is why Kuminga's a bit of a disappointment to me, because I thought he'd be further along, and I thought in his third year, after what I saw when he came onto the scene as a rookie, I thought he was going to, it was all going to come together for him. But Anthony Edwards is a guy that the game slowed down for him, and he's ready to take the mantle as the centerpiece. And then Gobert, Gobert's been a clown for the last couple of years, but he's returned, at least health-wise, to the way he was in Utah when he was, the best defensive player in the league. And he knows his role, and that to go along with that kid McDaniels and Naz Reid. They got these long, athletic guys, and they're all like in their mid-20s. That's a team that everybody should be keeping an eye on.
Yes, and I think ultimately it's about Anthony Edwards and the level that he's at and how far he can carry them, because I do think they have some unprovens in the playoffs in Towns and Gobert, to be sure. I'm not buying it. And I'm going to admit something to you that I admitted to a buddy of mine the other night, because I watched the Timberwolves a couple of times this week on the League Pass. They're one of my favorite teams to watch. I love watching the Clippers. I love watching the Timberwolves. I hate watching the Clippers. I've a Freudian slip there. I hate watching the Clippers. I watched Minnesota play Boston this week. A terrific game.
They beat them.
Back and forth. Goes to overtime. Yeah, they beat them. They beat Denver up at Target Center earlier in the year, the one Denver lost to this point. I love watching them. They're crazy.
Yeah,
like they do some of the dumbest stuff you'll ever see, and then make some of the most spectacular plays.
Well, that's Edwards, I think. A lot of that's Edwards.
And they definitely take on his personality. Anthony Edwards is a freaking treat. Like he is special, and he's confident, and he plays with an edge. And sometimes I think that, to his detriment as he finds his NBA game, I think there's also going to be a point where he's just going to be completely unstoppable. Maybe by the end of this year or next year, I think he is that good. But they do, and I like the job Chris Finch has done. I know he's been maligned at different times. I think Chris Finch is sharp. I think he knows what he's up against with some of the IQs of the players that he has, and you can tell that at times they're driving him crazy, but there's a toughness to their team. There's an edge to their team. There's a little bit crazy to their team in a good way. They're a fun watch. A few years ago, we used to do this on this show in this slot. Maybe we'll bring it back as the season goes on. I used to do my NBA league pass watchability rate, and Minnesota and Sacramento were probably my favorite two last year because they always played crazy ass games, just down to the wire. Unreal stuff's happening, both good and bad. I love watching the Timberwolves. I don't think the Timberwolves are contenders this year. Let's see where it shakes out. If they end up being top 4, I think they would tell you if they didn't have injuries last year, they would have been top 4 last year, and the injuries are why they wound up down in the play-in tournament fighting for their spot. But I'm willing to admit that they could win in the high 40s. I got to see it in the playoffs. So I think there's too much of the up and down, wild mood swings of a team to them to where I think this year they're contenders, but definitely a hell of a fun watch.
And the thing about Edwards is that when you think about the ridiculous athleticism of this guy, there's a buy-in defensively with this guy that, he can also dominate on the defensive end when he wants to. And I think that
comes from Finch, because the one thing that Finch did when he took over a couple years back in the middle of the year, they just immediately became a team that had zero resistance to a team that was at the very least, and you know this, Dan, I know you play a lot of pickup and played at different times. They're just that group that just is, we're just going to foul the hell out of you because we can't play defense until we learn how to play defense or until we get some guys on our squad that know how to play defense. We're just going to be physical, and you know what? If you can't handle it, then good luck. And if there's officials, they're not going to call everything. And it's kind of like the old Nelly Warriors, I thought, used to do that a little bit back in the day. Never great defensively, but until they could become good defensively in certain matchups, and look, they were never great, but we're just going to foul you and be rugged and tough. And I think there's a ruggedness and a toughness that Finch demanded immediately. I think it vibes with Anthony Edwards' personality, to your point, and now they have built more of a defensive foundation with the players that they've brought in to where it is legitimate.
And I think Mike Conley's been a good fit. We talk about how Chris Paul never turns the ball over. This guy he's even better numbers than that of Chris Paul as far as his assist to turnover ratio. So I think I'm with you that when it comes to, I think they're a year away. I think you still have to get over that hump and make a deep run into the playoffs to really understand how this thing works when it gets to the second season. It gets thrown around casually, but there is something to the experience component to all of this, that they're still very young. And I know Conley's had some runs and Gobert's been in the playoffs, but your best player doesn't have a lot of playoff experience. And that means something, that when you get deep into the playoffs, that the game changes and the game slows down. It becomes more of a half-court contest. And there's nuance to the game as you get into more important games that are that much more magnified. And I don't know that Edwards has crossed that threshold yet, and whether that team has the maturity to win, say, a big Game 7 on the road.
Yeah, or even just to get through a playoff. So, I think they're in line for, I'd almost bet right now, they're in line for most entertaining series in a play. You knew Sacramento was going to have an entertaining series last year, and it turned out we all got to see it up close and personal because it was against the Warriors, just based on the way that they played in the regular season. I think Minnesota would be my early. Yeah, you know what? Whoever they end up playing, that's going to be a whale of a series. There may wind up being a couple of fights that break out. Guys are going to have to be separated. It's just going to be crazy stuff going on left and right. So I like them, but I'm not sold on them. And to your point, I do think a year and maybe a player away as well, a complementary type player that holds the glue together in addition to Conley.
All right, let me just stay in the West and continue to pick your brain, going from the teams that have been a pleasant surprise to the bottom of the league and the conference, and that being the Memphis Grizzlies. If this thing continues to get ugly, right, and you're 10 or 15 games, you're 10 games under 500, and here comes Ja Morant, and that we're still a month or so, more than that, away from that becoming a reality. Is it too late? Can they salvage anything out of this season?
Maybe getting into the play-in tournament, because you look up in March, and if you're 8 games under 500, you're probably 3 games back of a playoff, of a play-in spot. But no, I think they're in deep trouble. Talked about it a couple weeks ago. I thought that this is where they were headed. I'm actually not surprised at all because they, one, not having John Morant. I thought when Steven Adams went down, that was like because he's kind of a glue guy as far as their toughness and everything they do, and then you're not going to have Ja. You basically blame everything that went wrong with your franchise on Dillon Brooks. And look, Dillon Brooks is no angel, and he's got his own issues. But to me, they scapegoated Dillon Brooks. I know people in the Bay hate Dillon Brooks, and that's fine. I get it, but I think they scapegoated Dillon Brooks. And to me, it's a perfect storm of the off the court stuff with Ja and getting himself suspended and injury. And letting a guy that was a key player go because you deemed him to be part of the problem. And now you look up and a lot of these teams have passed you by and you can't win at home anymore. They were great at home. They had a home-heavy schedule to start the year. Can't win a home game now, 0-5. Can't beat anybody. I mean, they barely beat Portland for their one win and played them consecutive games to have to do it. I think we're in major trouble and are in major trouble. And again, I'm not surprised because you think of the fall from grace from where they were at the end of that Warriors series, a team on the come, a year and a half ago to, flaming out against the Lakers in the first round of the playoffs. I thought this was set up for them to be in big, big trouble. And here we are. Yeah. And listen, I'm not going to lose sleep over it because they were pretty cocky and they were popping off, and you got to prove it. And now, we talked about how Anthony Edwards sort of sets the tone in Minnesota, and while he can be a little wild, there's still some serious basketball, not only talent, but there's a credibility to him, I think, and as crazy and wild-eyed as they can be, they're still a good basketball team. I think that this team sort of falls in line with that of Ja Morant, that, it's mismanaged. There's not a lot of discipline. And, a lot of it, listen, Steven Adams, I think Brandon Clark, I want to say, is out. But Jared Jackson's there and Desmond Bane's been playing. It's just not good enough. No, they're not good. That's just not good enough alone, unfortunately for them. But, yeah, there aren't going to be too many people in the Bay Area that are feeling sorry with as much run as the Grizzlies were given to everybody as far as running their mouths. All right, 888-957-9570. Good segment there, talking a little NBA at large, as it's Dan Devone, it's John Dickinson. We got one final segment. We'll get back into some dubs, upcoming homestand. How you feeling about this team at 6-3? It's all straight ahead here. Warriors this week on 95.7 The Game.
So, how's your research going?
Surprising. After I figured out the top-rated TVs in our price range, I went shopping for deals.
And who's the best?
It wasn't the internet, and it wasn't the warehouse club.
But?
It was video only. They had better deals on the Samsung, LG, and the Sony TVs that got the highest scores.
Better than online and at the club?
I know. Video only beat them all. And now we can afford an even better model for the same price. My research really paid off.
If we buy it video only.
Exactly. Otherwise.
And so we'll be talking about all of them with the Cavs and a couple against Minnesota and the first of what will be two against Oklahoma City as well the next time that we speak next Saturday. And the Warriors off to a solid start. And now we'll see if they can do it on the home floor, because you mentioned something earlier right off the top of the show. Hey, just because last year you were this dominant home team doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be that way again. And much to the way that the Warriors have flipped the script on the road. I mean, they were awful on the road a year ago. This year they're playing well. You can't count those home wins as guarantees, but if this Warriors team is ultimately going to be what they view themselves as, Dan, get to the low 20s as far as road wins, or be at 500 and try to win those 30 home games, and that's how you get to 50. And if you get to 50, I think everybody's going to like this team's shot at making a run if they're healthy.
Yeah, always nice to be home. And you would think that, listen, when you play at home, obviously when we're the Golden State Warriors and Chase, we know the history. But sometimes, weird, quirky things can arise. And, you could take on various personalities if you lose a game that you should have won. And, little demons begin to creep into the back of your head. You lose a sense of confidence, and sometimes
don't be the Clippers, Dan.
Exactly.
Don't be the Clippers, Devon. Don't be the team that thinks you can just show up and automatically win these games just because you're at home. You do that, especially against this group of teams that the Warriors are facing, and you're going to, I think, wind up being in a little bit of trouble.
Well, therein lies, I think, the difference is that while it could happen, that in all likelihood it's not, because not only are you not the Clippers, you have, a veteran-laden team, and you have a Steph Curry and you have a Draymond to remind guys, especially the younger players or the players that have not been here and done that before, that, listen, you just don't simply show up or you don't mail anything in. And Chris Paul also can bring his veteran guile. So I think that the Warriors will be their dominant selves at home. And I think that what we're seeing on the road, whether they win, the winning percentage remains the same, will be a challenge. But I've seen enough, and I think that, I don't mean to speak for you, would agree that clearly there has been a culture change with the Golden State Warriors. And while sometimes things can be a little bit misleading this early in the season, I think what you're witnessing with the Golden State Warriors, especially on the road, that this is pretty much legitimate. And the maturity of Chris Paul, and somebody on the text line, this is beautiful. And this is unofficial because I'm just simply going off of you, 510. They got CP3's numbers, 66 assists to 7 turnovers. Meanwhile, Jordan Poole, again, unofficially, 29 assists to 21 turnovers. Wow. Pretty much tells you everything you need to know at this point.
It tells you about Chris Paul, the stabilizer, and it tells you that Jordan Poole probably still falls down a lot when he's trying to drive to the basket and loses the ball for a turnover. That's the cousin, the distant cousin of the pick six in the NFL. How many the Warriors led the NBA in the NBA version of the pick six? Just a bad pass or a fumbled ball that goes the other way for a dunk or a layup.
Well, I just remember specifically in games last year with the game hanging in the balance, and again, not going back on Jordan Poole, but sorry, Jordan, I remember the ball in his hands, and you just had this sense, especially in a close game, something bad is going to happen, all right? That was just an innate fear. And now it's the polar opposite. When Chris Paul has the ball in his hands, I'm not saying you're going to get a bucket. I'm not saying Chris Paul is going to get to his mid-range, but you have this almost sense of comfort that Chris Paul is going to get you in the right action, or that Chris Paul is going to put the ball in the right guy's hands. And that's the difference between winning and losing, and that's the difference, I think, between a bench that is now a quality bench, one of the best in the NBA, as opposed to one of the worst a year ago.
Well, it's just it's one, don't screw things up, and it's two, make the simple play and trust that over the long haul, if you do that, you're gonna be better than the opposition. And I think it's that formula. But having someone that's as elite at it to be able to be the guy that's the person that's at the forefront of it, and in Chris Paul, a future Hall of Famer, I think that makes it all the more easy and effective. A couple of things. Comcast Business text line. 510. I read this one only because it just popped up, and I'll let you respond to it. There were actually some other ones I really wanted to get into. Devone, the number one Jordan Poole hater club. Oh. You want to pop him one still?
No, you know what, JD? So I used to
not my question, but the 510 did ask that.
I used to run this thing on my show. I don't know how we got into this. It was the MPF, most punchable face. I just happened to mention it one day, and it just took on a life of its own. And Jordan Poole was right at the very top. I think Skip Bayless came in a close second. And who's the guy who's now, he was with Milwaukee. He was the former Duke player.
Grayson Allen?
Grayson Allen.
He's with Phoenix.
He's with Phoenix now. That's right. He was always in the top 5. So I think that's what they're referring to. Listen, I was not a Jordan Poole fan. I can just tell you, as a fan, there's some people you gravitate to, and there's some people that you just enjoy watching, and it's a personal thing. And I never liked the guy. I just, even when things are going well, and you cannot deny, listen, I think we don't want to have revisionist history that Jordan Poole, all he did was turn the ball over and create enemies. The Warriors don't make that playoff run or get to the NBA Finals if he doesn't do what he did against Denver in those playoffs. And he was amazing. We cannot ignore the fact that this guy was the second best scorer more often than not next to Steph Curry. But they
needed him to be.
Yeah. But I'm just telling you that the sticking out the tongue, feigning the injuries, just the personality. It's just like I'm out on the guy, and that's just me. And I don't know if I'm alone. I'm not asking for people to join me in my misery.
I'll admit, on the Warriors end of it, and a couple other text messages I do want to get to here between now and noon before we call it a day. But I'll admit, I'm a little surprised that it's worked as well as it's worked with the not the Jordan Poole part, but this bench with Chris Paul and Saric, who comes over, somebody that had played with Chris Paul previously. Moody and Kuminga are now in it. GP2. That balance of it. I am surprised that not that it's been effective, but that it's been effective at the level that it's been effective to, plus whatever the heck it was, 14, 15 points a game on average through the first 9 games of the season. I will wholeheartedly admit it. And there have been times even where that group, I think I mentioned this to you last week, there's times where the CP3, Moody, Payton, Kuminga, Saric specific 5 is out there together, where I go, how are they going to score? And but for the most part, they have been able to figure it out with that group. There have been 3 or 4 little 3-4 minute stretches where they haven't, but even on the nights where they haven't in the first go round, Kerr makes maybe one tweak, put a Klay Thompson in for one of those 4 players, and it flows a lot better in the second half. So it's worked, my man. It really has.
I don't think you're alone. I think if you were to get a beer and be alone with Steve Kerr, he might admit as much that, we knew
this level. Yeah,
we knew we upgraded, but to be this good, and maybe things will level off as the season goes along. But I don't think you're alone. I think that Steve Kerr would have to admit that this has been even better than he expected, and this is a best case scenario what we've witnessed to this point.
A couple other on the Comcast Business text line. The 510 did ask, is Draymond and Chris Paul, Draymond and GP2 back tonight? And I am looking at the latest injury report. The Warriors had no injuries to report as of an hour ago, and I'm looking at the current one as we speak here. Give me 1 second to click it. Warriors and the Cavs. Yeah, no, just Ty Jerome for Cleveland, and the Warriors. Yeah, Ty Jerome, Isaac Okoro for Cleveland in this one tonight, and the Warriors with no injuries to report. So they did recall Trayce Jackson-Davis and Brandon Podziemski after the big nights that they both had last night for Santa Cruz. So the Warriors with the 3 two-way players are going to be, they're going to have everybody available to play, and so they'll have a healthy and active. So good news on that front with Dre and with Gary Payton II back and available to play for the Warriors in that one. 510, what was your opinion of the officiating in the game against Denver? Yeah, I mean, look, the missed goaltend is about as bad as it gets. I know there was another turnover that they called against Wiggins that maybe shouldn't have been. I think that one came up on the 2-minute report. It wasn't good, but I don't think there's been anything outlandish at this point where you can say, the Warriors have absolutely been fleeced or anything like that. But the missed goaltend is as bad as it gets, and the inability to review it is unfortunate.
That hurt because it came at such a key part of the contest. These things really do, and I know this is why you like Steve Kerr, because Steve Kerr was hot. He got teed up, right? I think he did. And, Steve Kerr was going after the referees. Sometimes he does that to protect and back his players. But also he's an emotional guy. But Steve Kerr always says the right things, that these things, and they really do have a way of evening out. And the referees are listen, I can go on forever how the referees, especially when it comes to the NBA, the officiating just becomes disruptive. And it's hard to watch a game simply because of the fact that refs wait to the fourth quarter before they let them play. Let them play the entire damn game as far as I'm concerned. But,
amen.
When it comes to, Steve Kerr's like, look, these things really do, as frustrated as you might get, the other team has just as much reason. They can point out just as many times where they got jobbed on a call. And then I saw Taylor Jenkins last night just going off, and maybe this was just sort of, the frustration boiling over, and he's going to get fined because he went after the officiating last night, and he was pretty pointed. and dropping some F-bombs. And he just went after the refs and said
1-8. That's what 1-8 will do.
Exactly. And he's saying that's why we lost the game because, you teed up my man, Jared Jackson. I didn't happen to watch all of the contest, but that you're right. That's just the level of the frustration that's seeping out at this point.
And I think he's in trouble too. I think that's also this. I think that's also this. Like he might be gone here before December.
He's not going to make the All-Star break.
Yeah, the way things are going as far as that group goes. JD, what's your mention the officiating? Sorry, wrong one there. Got to push back. We got somebody pushing back on Paul George. Paul George would be amazing for this Warriors squad if you wanted to move Wiggins. Well, yeah, Paul George is the Warriors' fourth or fifth option would be awesome, no doubt. My problem is he's treated like he's a number one option, and I don't think he's been a number one option in a decade. I mean, I don't think he's been a true number one option since pre-injury in Indiana when he was getting to conference finals against LeBron.
Yeah, and just you mentioned Andrew Wiggins, just sort of to end things where we started. I again, just to reiterate, I'm not surprised, nor am I overly concerned or alarmed of his play up to this point, simply because we have seen this pretty much throughout the duration of his career with the Golden State Warriors, where he has a tendency just to not be the most energetic player. I'll stop short of saying checked out and disengaged. I think that was pretty insightful of what it is somebody that has a tendency to be an introvert in your own right. You can speak much better to that than I can. But I do think that he could be streaky. And I do think that there is another shoe that's going to drop when it comes to the likes of Andrew Wiggins, and that Wiggins will be a force certainly before the end of the season. And I think it's just, the proverbial powder keg that he will be an impactful player once again. There's very little doubt in my mind that will once again return to the Golden State Warriors.
Assuming there isn't something bigger going on, I'm with you. I'm really not that worried about Wiggins. Now, you lose a couple of games here on this homestand, and he continues to play the way that he's playing. I think it can flip fast. I do think we have to evaluate this. To me, you always with me, Dan, get the benefit of the doubt when you win, and I think it allows players that aren't playing well more time to come around. But the moment you're not winning, and I get it, everyone wants to have the conversation in the moment, and I think it's been a little over the top, to be perfectly honest, the chatter about Wiggins and how bad it's been, and then the levels that it goes to. And I believe me, I think it goes to that level so quickly because of his personality, but his personality is also based on his history as a player. When Wiggins hasn't played well, it's always kind of that whole, is he fully invested in it? Now, again, I think some of that's unfair because of the personality type and all of that. But I think people have been, let's give it 10 games. And you know what? Let's give it another 10 games and see where the Warriors are at and see where Wiggins is at. I mean, I've heard people saying, start Kuminga. Like Kuminga. Now, if Kuminga had played as well in the first halves of these games that he's played in some of the second halves, then I think we would be having a conversation about maybe there needs to be some kind of a move made. Or if the Warriors weren't winning at the 6-3 clip, maybe there needs to be some kind of a move made. But I don't think Kuminga has played well enough to where you're like, he has to start over Wiggins. They basically had the same line the other night, and everybody was thrilled with Kuminga and thought Wiggins stunk. And so, I think it's kind of taken on a little bit of a life of its own. Because, again, Wiggins did help him win that title, but Warrior fans do tend to be a little territorial among the who's one of us, who's one of our own, right? Like Wiggins was an outsider. Yes, an outsider that helped him win a title in a big way, but, Kuminga is the fresh, young, athletic dude that's going to be the next Kawhi or Giannis, at the high end, I think, and obviously I'm kidding, but that's kind of how he has been billed and how some Warrior fans talk about him. And so they're in line to kind of want to see a little bit more. Pump the brakes on all of it. Let's give Wiggins 5 to 10 more games. Let's see where the Warriors' record is at in terms of wins and losses. I'm willing to give him this whole homestand. Let's see how it goes. And let's also let Kuminga continue to grow into what is going to be best for this Warriors team, and that is this season, which is being an effective role player. Kuminga, to me, is figuring out how to be an effective role player, and that, for this team this season, is far more important than whatever his ceiling is down the line.
I think that brings up an interesting point. Is at what point does Jonathan Kuminga, and maybe he doesn't get to this, to have this conversation with himself while looking in the mirror, is this something he shares with his agent, that there becomes a level of frustration? Well, and I mentioned this earlier, that when you're a rookie with the Warriors, you're not a rookie with Portland, you're not a rookie with Houston, you're not a rookie with a team that's in the midst of a rebuild. This isn't Detroit. We'll just put you out there and you can learn on the go, make your mistakes. That's okay because we're not going anywhere. You're not going to get run. You have to play within the system, and if you make mistakes repeatedly, you're not going to play. It's as simple as that, because we're a plug-and-play team that's ready to win a title right now, and that's the focus. We are, and we talked about matching windows. The core is ready to win a title right now, and their time is running out, so you've got to hit the ground running. At what point, JD, or does this ever happen, where Jonathan Kuminga says, you know what, I'm tired of playing within the rules. I'm tired of having this short leash of I've got to be this type of a player. I want to go somewhere where somebody's just going to let me be me. Let me be that guy who can just go the full 94 feet, and let me just unleash all this athleticism and this talent that's being inhibited by somebody like that of Steve Curry and or the Golden State Warriors.
He may get to that point. I think there were some that believed he was pretty close to that point at the end of last season, which to me was ridiculous, given what he had actually done in his NBA career. I think this year, I've said this, I think there's almost a concerted effort on the Warriors' part to give him opportunities, but also give him opportunities to do the things that he wants to do. I mean, I can't tell you how many times the Warriors have put him in position to get the ball in the wing and basically do whatever you want. And I said it earlier, it looks like he's got a green light. It looks like they've told him, you get the rock in your hands, look to shoot and look to score. And he has, with varying degrees of success. A lot of the first halves, it's been god-awful. A lot of the second halves, it's been borderline spectacular. So you take the good with the bad. I do think, and we're going to be up against it here in the next couple of minutes. So maybe this is this is absolutely a conversation that will move forward into the coming weeks and toward the end of the year, based on how Kuminga plays and Wiggins too, and everybody else. The Warriors are going to have to make a decision on a contract extension for Kuminga. They picked up his fourth-year option, so he's signed for this season and next season. Well, he's due for an extension this coming offseason. Or do you let it play out if you're the Warriors? And I can already see there being as things stand right now, I can already see an impasse between what Kuminga thinks he should. Like, I would bet that Kuminga and his agents right now think he's at a minimum an $80 million, like a 4-year, $80 million extension, and that's like a starting point. And I don't think he's reached that level yet. That's almost the Jordan Poole, where Jordan Poole was 2 years ago at this time. If you think back, like, he was 18 a game, efficient, filling in for Clay. Like, wow, like the Warriors are going to have to pay this dude. Like, everybody was saying that about Jordan Poole, even the skeptics at that particular point in time. He pushed the 80 in November up to 120 by the end of the year, with helping them win a title and everything like that. I don't think Kuminga's even reached that 80 mark at this point, or even close to it at this point. That doesn't mean you're not going to want it or think you deserve it. So I think that's going to be interesting. The other option is you can also they already picked up the option. You can, give him a qualifying offer. He's going to be a restricted free agent if he wants to be. The Warriors can wait a year. And I think this right now today, I would wait on any kind of Jonathan Kuminga. And again, you don't have to decide for another year, but I would wait on any Jonathan Kuminga extension, assuming he continues to play the way that he's played to this point this season. Play out that fourth year, if unless you think he's somebody that could be part of a trade package at that point. Play out that fourth year and make a team make him an offer, and then you decide whether you match the offer or not, because he'd be a restricted free agent. And then you could just keep him at that point if you want to keep him. I feel like that is the path they could have gone down with Poole. They chose not to because he was so good They paid him early. And I would not do that with Kuminga, who's been less effective at his best to this point than Poole had been to this point.
Yeah, and getting back to Jordan Poole, they paid him early, and then of course, you can finish that sentence by saying it didn't work. It didn't work because while there was a risk paying him early, I think if they could do it all over again, they would have never given him the extension. But that's there's a risk element involved in all of this.
Got him Chris Paul, though. You don't give him that extension, you don't get Chris Paul.
No, that's true. But I think as a player, they were a bit – there wasn't the sort of growth, both from a personal standpoint and on the floor. I don't think that's what they envisioned. And with that history being so fresh in the mind of the Golden State Warriors that, yeah, there's no way in hell, sorry, JD, and or your agent, if you're listening this morning, that the Golden State Warriors would even encroach going – down that road with Jonathan Kuminga. And to your point, furthermore, he hasn't proven it on the floor that he's worthy of any extension at this point. So if ever there was a guy that you would let play out and, wait to see what his offer is and get an opportunity to match, it's Jonathan Kuminga. Jonathan Kuminga is the quintessential player that's in flux right now. He's still at that fork in the road. He could be, that guy that has the breakout year, and maybe, as we all sort of hold out and think that as we get teased with all of this crazy skill that he might be on his way to being the next latest greatest, and or he could be this guy that continues to make mistakes while doing some remarkable things. It's the proverbial one step forward and two steps back. So
time will tell on that. Time will tell on that. And look, it's a little premature to have the absolute answer. He could completely explode in a good way in the next year and a half, and he winds up getting paid a lot of money. That's also still on the table as well. Dan, great stuff. Appreciate it. We'll do it again next week. Looking forward to it, my man.
Thanks, buddy.
For the great Mark Grandy and for Dan Devone, I'm John Dickinson. We'll talk to you, at 4:30 as I'm headed over to Chase for Warriors Live. Warriors and the Cavs. A lot of home games coming up, and we're going to have you covered right here on 95.7 The Game.
The Chase Ink Business Premier Card is made for people who make things happen, like me. I'm Sam, founder and CEO of Manifest, a product design company that makes everyday products designed smarter. I get 2.5% cash back on purchases of $5,000 or more, plus unlimited 2% cash back on all other purchases, which helps us make more smart ideas into a brilliant reality.
The Ink Business Premier Card. Learn more at chase.com/business premier. Chase for business. Make more of what's yours. Real business owner compensated for their participation. Account subject to credit approval. Restrictions and limitations apply.